My stepson pushed me at the Christmas table and spat the words that would seal his fate. "This seat belongs to the man of the house. Old man, get out." I fell to the ground in front of the whole family, the gravy burning my skin and the humiliation burning my soul. But what he did not know was that very night I would change his life forever. He thought he was kicking out a helpless pensioner. He had no idea he was declaring war on the owner of the bank. When he woke up the next morning, he had 35 missed calls, and his world had turned to ash. Before I tell you how I dismantled his life piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who you are. The scent of roasted turkey and pine needles filled the air of the mansion in Atlanta, but to me it smelled like betrayal. I am Otis King. I am 75 years old. For 40 years, I was the chief architect for one of the largest construction firms in the country. I designed skyscrapers that scrape the clouds. I drew the blueprints for the very hospitals where my grandchildren were born, and I designed this house. Every beam, every archway, every window was born in my mind before it existed in reality. I built this place for my late wife Ruby and for our daughter Zoe. But tonight, as snow fell softly against the bay windows, I felt like a ghost haunting my own creation. The dining room was set for 12. The crystal chandelier, a gift from Ruby for our 30th anniversary, cast a warm golden glow over the feast. I walked into the room, my joints aching slightly from the winter chill. I was wearing my favorite cardigan, the one with the suede elbow patches. It was old and comfortable, much like me. I walked toward the head of the table. It was a heavy mahogany chair with high backing. It was the chair I had sat in for every Christmas dinner since 1985. It was the chair where I carved the turkey. It was the chair where I led the prayer. It was my chair. But before I could reach it, a hand slammed onto the backrest. I looked up. It was Declan, my son-in-law. He is 40 years old, a white man with a smile that looks like it was bought at a discount store. He was wearing a silk suit that I knew cost $2,000 because I pay the credit card bill he thinks is a corporate bonus. He looked down at me, his blue eyes cold and filled with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Excuse me, Declan," I said, my voice raspy but firm. "You are in my way." He did not move. He leaned in closer, the smell of expensive scotch on his breath. "I do not think so, Otis. We are making some changes this year." I frowned. "Changes? What are you talking about?" "This seat," he said, patting the leather upholstery, "is for the head of the household. It is for the provider. It is for the man who keeps the lights on." I looked around the table. My daughter Zoe was arranging napkins, pretending to be busy. She refused to meet my eyes. The guests, mostly Declan, his shallow friends from his failing tech startup, were watching with amused curiosity. They thought this was a game. They thought the old black man in the cardigan was confused. "I pay the utility bills here, Otis." Declan sneered, his voice raising so everyone could hear. "My name is on the electric bill. My name is on the water bill. Therefore, this is my chair. You can sit over there." He pointed a manicured finger toward the kitchen. There was a small folding table set up near the swinging doors. It was the kind of table you use for children who are too messy to sit with the adults. "You want me to sit at the folding table?" I asked quietly. "In the house I built. Built implies ownership." Otis, Declan laughed. "You are just a guest here now. A permanent guest who eats our food and takes up our space. Honestly, it is embarrassing. A man your age should have his own place, or at least a room in a facility where professionals can wipe his chin. But since Zoe is too soft to kick you out, the least you can do is know your place. Now move." He did not wait for me to step aside. He used his shoulder. He checked me like a hockey player. I was not expecting it. I am 75. I am strong for my age, but I am not a linebacker. I lost my balance. My foot caught on the edge of the expensive Persian rug. I fell backward. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the ceiling I had painted myself 30 years ago. I saw the horrified faces of the guests. I reached out to grab something to steady myself, but my hand only found the edge of the serving platter. I crashed to the floor with a sickening thud. The porcelain platter shattered. Hot gravy and sliced turkey rained down on me, splattering my face, ruining my cardigan, soaking into my white shirt. Pain shot through my hip, a sharp, hot flash of agony that made me gasp. I lay there on the floor of my own dining room, covered in food, looking up at the people I had welcomed into my home. There was silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Then Declan chuckled. It was a dry, nervous sound. "Look at that," he said, shaking his head. "Clumsy. That is exactly what I mean. He is a liability." I did not look at him. I looked for Zoe, my little girl, the girl I had carried on my shoulders, the girl I had sat with through nightmares and heartbreaks. She was standing by the sideboard, holding a bottle of wine. Her face was pale. "Zoe," I whispered. "My hip." She looked at me. Then she looked at Declan. I saw the calculation in her eyes. I saw her weigh her love for her father against her fear of her husband. I saw her weigh the past against her comfortable present. She made her choice. "Oh, Dad," she sighed, her voice dripping with annoyance, not concern. "Declan is right. You really should be more careful. Look at the mess you made. That rug is an antique." She did not rush to help me up. She grabbed a towel and started dabbing at the rug near my head, avoiding my eyes completely. "You should probably go clean yourself up," she muttered, "and maybe just stay in your room for the rest of the night. We have guests, and this is just too much drama. Too much drama." I was lying on the floor, covered in grease and pain, and she was worried about the rug and the drama. I felt something inside me snap. It was not a bone. It was the last thread of patience, the last cord of unconditional love I had been holding on to. For years I had played the role of the quiet, retired grandfather. I had let them believe I was living on a small pension. I had let them believe that the money flowing into their lives came from Declan, his genius business acumen. I had done it to protect them. I had done it because I wanted them to feel independent. But they did not feel independent. They felt entitled. And entitlement is a parasite that eats gratitude. I placed my hands on the floor. I ignored the screaming pain in my hip. I pushed myself up. "Do not help him," Declan ordered the room. "He needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. If he wants to live in my world, he needs to stop being a burden." I rose slowly, inch by inch. My joints popped. My breathing was heavy. I wiped a smear of gravy from my cheek with the back of my hand. I stood there swaying slightly, a mess of a man in a ruined sweater. But when I lifted my head, I did not look like a victim. I looked at Declan. He was smirking, adjusting his tie, preparing to sit in my chair. He thought he had won. He thought he had just asserted his dominance over the weak old male in the pack. He met my gaze, and his smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. My eyes were not watery with age. They were cold. They were the eyes of a man who had stared down union bosses and corrupt city officials in the 70s. They were the eyes of a chief architect who knew exactly how to find the structural weakness in a building and bring it down with a single well-placed charge. "You are right, Declan," I said. My voice was low, steady, and dangerous. It did not shake. "I have been a burden. I have been taking up space." I looked at Zoe, who was still scrubbing the rug, "and I have been confused about who owns what." Declan laughed again, relieved that I was apparently accepting my defeat. "Exactly, Otis. Glad you finally see it. Now go wash up. We will send a plate to your room. Maybe." I did not move toward the kitchen. I did not move toward the stairs. I turned and walked toward the front door. "Where are you going?" Zoe asked, looking up finally. "Dad, it is snowing. You cannot go out there like that." I opened the heavy front door. The wind howled, blowing snow into the foyer. The cold was biting, but it felt clean compared to the air inside that house. "I am going to fix the mistake I made, Zoe," I said without looking back. "What mistake?" she asked. "Thinking that blood makes you family," I said. I stepped out into the storm and pulled the door shut behind me. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. I stood on the porch shivering as the snow melted on my warm, gravy-stained shirt. I did not have my car keys. Declan had taken my Cadillac last week, claiming he needed the garage space for his Tesla. He had sold my car without asking me, and I had let him because I thought family shared. I walked down the long driveway. I was 75 years old. I was covered in food. I was walking into a blizzard. But I was not helpless. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking from the cold, but my fingers were precise. I did not call a taxi. I opened the Uber app and selected the black option. I needed a ride to the St. Regis Hotel downtown. As I waited in the cold, I looked back at the house. My house. The house I built with my own hands. The windows were glowing with warmth. Inside, they were probably toasting to their victory. They were probably laughing at the old man wandering in the snow. Let them laugh. Because while I stood there, I was already doing the math. I was calculating net worth. I was calculating leverage. I was calculating the exact amount of debt Declan had unknowingly accrued on the cards I paid. He wanted to be the man of the house. He wanted to be the provider. Fine. Tomorrow morning I would give him exactly what he asked for. I would give him the bills. I would give him the mortgage. I would give him the reality of his life without my silent subsidy. The black SUV pulled up to the curb. The driver rushed out to open the door, eyes wide at my appearance. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked. I climbed into the warm leather back seat. I looked at the mansion one last time. "I am better than all right, son," I said as the car pulled away. I just woke up. The suitcase hit the snow with a dull, heavy thud that sounded like a body falling. It was a vintage leather piece, one I had bought in London 40 years ago when I signed my first international contract. Now it lay half-buried in a drift, the rich brown leather soaking up the freezing slush of an Atlanta blizzard. I stood on the porch, the wind cutting through my gravy-stained shirt like 1,000 razor blades. The cold was absolute. It did not just touch my skin, it sought my bones. But I did not shiver from the temperature. I shivered from the sheer, unadulterated malice radiating from the man standing in the doorway. Declan wiped his hands on a napkin as if he had just taken out the trash. The warmth of the foyer spilled out behind him, golden and inviting, a cruel reminder of the comfort I was being denied. "Go find a nursing home, old man," he spat, his voice carrying over the howling wind. "I am sick of it. Sick. I am sick of seeing you lurking in the hallways like a ghost. I am sick of you shuffling around my kitchen. This is a house for the living, Otis, not a waiting room for the grave." He kicked the door shut. The slam echoed in the night, final and absolute. Then the deadbolt slid home. Click. I was locked out. I stood there for a moment staring at the wood grain of the door. I had chosen that wood. I had selected the stain. I had drawn the specifications for that very frame on a drafting table in 1982. I knew exactly how much load that lintel could bear. I knew the structural integrity of every inch of this house. And now the parasite living inside it had decided the host was no longer necessary. I walked down the steps carefully. My hip was throbbing a deep, rhythmic pulse of pain that synced with my heartbeat. I bent down and picked up the suitcase. It was heavy, wet, and cold. I dusted off the snow, but the leather was already stained. It did not matter. Nothing mattered now except putting one foot in front of the other. I looked toward the garage. Habit made me reach for my pocket where my car keys used to be. For 20 years, a pearl-white Cadillac DeVille had sat in that garage. It was a tank. It was a symbol. It was the first car I bought after paying off the mortgage. Ruby used to love that car. She said the seats felt like floating on a cloud. But the garage door was closed and my Cadillac was gone. Declan had sold it last week. He did not ask me. He did not consult me. He just announced at breakfast that he needed the space. "The Tesla needs a charging station, Otis," he had said, his mouth full of eggs I paid for. "Your old boat is just gathering dust. I got you a good price. It is going to the scrapyard." He had sold my history to make room for his toy. He had traded my dignity for a battery charger. And I had let him because I was trying to be the peacekeeper. I was trying to be the good father-in-law. I turned away from the garage and began the long walk down the driveway. The snow was falling harder now, blinding white sheets that erased the world. The driveway was a quarter-mile long, winding through the old oak trees. I planted those trees. As I walked, the wind tearing at my thin clothes, my mind drifted back. I wasn't walking in a blizzard in 2023 anymore. I was walking through the mud in 1978. I was 30 years old then. I was a black architect in a city that was too busy to hate, but too proud to change. I had just landed the contract for the Midtown Plaza. It was the biggest job of my life. I had money in my pocket and fire in my belly. I remembered standing on this very hill when it was nothing but scrub brush and red Georgia clay. The real estate agent, a man with a smile like a shark, had tried to steer me toward the south side. "You do not want this lot, Mr. King," he had said. "The neighbors. Well, they might not be welcoming to your kind of architecture." He meant my kind of skin. But I bought it anyway. I bought it with cash. I cleared the land myself on weekends, my hands blistering from the axe handle. I poured the foundation with my own sweat mixing into the concrete. I framed the walls while Ruby was pregnant with Zoe, sitting on a cooler drinking lemonade and telling me where the nursery should go. I built this fortress to protect my family. I built these walls to keep the cold out. I built this roof to shelter my daughter from the storms of the world. And now my daughter was inside warm and dry, watching her husband throw me into the storm. The betrayal tasted like copper in my mouth. It wasn't just that they kicked me out, it was that they erased me. They looked at the walls I built and saw their property. They looked at the food I bought and saw their dinner. They looked at me and saw a line item expense they wanted to cut. I reached the iron gates at the end of the driveway. I had designed these too. The pattern in the wrought iron was subtle, but if you looked closely, you could see the initials O and R woven into the vines. Otis and Ruby. I pushed the gate open. It creaked a mournful sound in the night. I stepped onto the public road. The streetlights were halos in the snow. I was shivering violently now. My teeth chattered. My hands were numb. I looked like a vagrant. A homeless old man with a wet suitcase and a gravy-stained shirt standing on the side of the road in an affluent suburb. A police cruiser drove by slowly. The officer slowed down, shining a spotlight on me. I straightened my back. I lifted my chin. I dared him to stop. I dared him to ask the old black man what he was doing in this neighborhood. He didn't stop. He drove on, assuming I was someone else's problem. I was not a problem. I was a solution waiting to happen. I walked to the bus stop bench and sat down under the small shelter. It offered little protection from the wind, but it was better than standing. I wiped the snow from my phone screen. My fingers were stiff blue with cold. It took me 3 tries to unlock the screen. I opened the Uber app. Declan thought I would call a taxi, or maybe he thought I would call the county shelter. He thought I was destitute. He thought my pension was my only lifeline. He did not know about King Ventures. He did not know about the diversified portfolio I had been building since 1980. He did not know that the failing tech startup he was the CEO of was actually alive only because a venture capital firm had injected $2 million into it last month. And he certainly did not know that I owned that venture capital firm. I scrolled past the economy options. I scrolled past the standard rides. I selected Uber Black. I typed in the destination, St. Regis, Atlanta. It wasn't just a hotel. It was a palace. And I wasn't just a guest there. I was a silent partner. I owned 5% of the hospitality group that managed the property. I had a standing reservation for the penthouse suite, a perk of my investment that I had never used because I preferred to sleep in my own bed. Tonight I would sleep in silk sheets. I watched the little car icon move on the map. 5 minutes away. I looked back up the hill toward the mansion one last time. The lights were still on. I imagined Declan laughing, pouring another glass of my wine, telling his friends how he finally handled the situation. I imagined Zoe nodding, sipping her drink, trying to ignore the guilt gnawing at her gut. They thought the story was over. They thought the old man was gone. I let out a breath of steam into the cold air. "You kicked me out of my chair, Declan," I whispered to the wind. "You kicked me out of my house. You wanted to be the man. You wanted to be the owner. Well, tomorrow morning, you are going to get exactly what you wanted. You are going to own the mortgage payments. You are going to own the utility bills. You are going to own the property taxes. And you are going to own the debt because the bank is closed to you, son, and the landlord is coming to collect." A sleek black Escalade pulled up to the curb, purring like a panther. The driver, a young man in a sharp suit, jumped out and grabbed my wet suitcase without a word of judgment. He opened the rear door for me. The interior was warm. It smelled of leather and expensive citrus air freshener. I sank into the seat, my hip throbbing in protest. "Where to, Mr. King?" the driver asked, checking his app. "The St. Regis," I said, my voice raspy. "And son." "Yes, sir. Take the scenic route. I want to drive past the bank on the way." "Why, sir?" "Because I want to see if the lights are on," I said, closing my eyes. "I have a lot of work to do in the morning." The car pulled away, leaving the snow and the mansion behind. I did not look back. I was cold, I was in pain, and I was alone. But I was Otis King, and I had just begun to fight. The elevator to the penthouse of the St. Regis did not hum. It glided. It moved with a silence that cost money. I leaned against the mahogany-paneled wall, my gravy-stained shirt reflecting in the polished brass railing. I looked like a vagrant who had snuck past security, but the key card in my pocket said otherwise. When the doors opened directly into the foyer of the suite, the warmth hit me first. It wasn't the dry, suffocating heat of the mansion heating system. It was a subtle, perfectly regulated warmth that smelled of fresh orchids and expensive furniture polish. I walked across the marble floor, my wet shoes squeaking softly. I did not stop to admire the view of the Atlanta skyline, though it was magnificent. I walked straight to the bathroom. I turned on the shower, letting the water run until it was steaming. I stripped off the clothes I had worn to my own execution. The cardigan with the suede patches, the white shirt stained brown with turkey grease, the trousers soaked with snow. I left them in a pile on the floor like a shed skin. I stood under the water for 20 flawless minutes. I scrubbed the smell of Declan's insults off my skin. I washed away the feeling of my daughter's silence. When I stepped out, I wrapped myself in a robe that was thicker than the winter coat I had just discarded. I walked into the living area. It was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the city lights into a personal mural. I went to the wet bar. I ignored the champagne. I reached for the bottle on the top shelf. Pappy Van Winkle, 23-year-old bourbon. $500 a shot if you bought it at the bar downstairs. Here it was complimentary. I poured 2 fingers into a heavy crystal glass. I did not add ice. I wanted it to burn. I took a sip. The liquid fire coated my throat, grounding me. I was alive. I was warm. And I was furious. I walked to the desk by the window. It was a beautiful piece of furniture, rosewood and leather. I placed my drink on a coaster and pulled my laptop out of the wet leather suitcase I had dragged in with me. The laptop was an old Dell, thick as a brick, with duct tape on one corner of the hinge. Declan used to laugh at it. He called it a dinosaur. He told me I should upgrade to a MacBook so I could look like a modern human being. He did not understand. This machine was not a toy. It was a vault. It was air-gapped, encrypted, and secured with biometric protocols that Declan's tech startup boys couldn't crack in 1,000 years. I opened it. The fan whirred to life, a sound I had missed. I typed in a password that was 40 characters long. The screen flickered, then settled on a simple dashboard. No fancy graphics, just numbers. Rows and columns of black numbers on a white background. I took another sip of bourbon and looked at the bottom right corner. Net worth. $18,542,112. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Declan thought I lived on a pension. He thought I scraped by on $2,000 a month from Social Security and a small union fund. He thought the money I contributed to the household was a struggle for me. He thought I was a charity case he was graciously allowing to exist in his orbit. He had no idea. He didn't know that in 1992 I founded King Ventures. He didn't know that while I was designing skyscrapers, I was also buying the land underneath them. He didn't know that I had been a silent angel investor in 50 different companies over the last 2 decades. I kept my name off the letterhead. I used a law firm to handle the proxies. I preferred the shadows. Shadows are safe. In the shadows, nobody asks you for loans, nobody tries to hustle you, and nobody pretends to love you just to get a check. I scrolled down the list of active investments. My finger hovered over one name in particular. Technova Solutions. Declan is company. I remembered the day he pitched it to me 5 years ago. He sat in my living room, sweating through his shirt, showing me slides about revolutionizing the supply chain with blockchain. He didn't know he was pitching to a shark. I listened. The idea was mediocre, but his passion seemed real. And he was married to Zoe. I wanted them to succeed. I wanted my daughter to be married to a winner. So I made a call to my lawyer, Sterling. I told him to fund it. $5 million in seed capital dispersed over 5 years. Declan thought the money came from a mysterious consortium in Silicon Valley. He walked around puffing his chest out, bragging about how he had secured venture capital funding. He bought the Tesla. He bought the silk suits. He bought the arrogance. He never knew that the hand feeding him was the same hand he slapped away from the dinner table tonight. I clicked on the Technova file. The financials were a disaster. Red ink everywhere. He was burning cash like it was kindling. He wasn't revolutionizing the supply chain, he was revolutionizing how fast a CEO could waste capital on image consultants and business lunches. And yet I had kept the tap flowing. Because he was family. Because I thought if I supported him eventually he would grow into the man he pretended to be. I was a fool. A notification pinged on the screen. It was a high-priority alert from the corporate credit card account. I frowned. I had issued a black card to the CEO of Technova for business expenses only. Server costs, software licenses, emergency travel for client meetings. I opened the alert. Transaction approved, Emerald Maldives Resort and Spa. $15,400. I stared at the screen. The numbers seemed to mock me. $15,000. An hour ago he had thrown me out into a blizzard. He had told me I was a burden. He had told me I couldn't sit at the table because he paid the electric bill. And then while I was walking through the snow freezing and humiliated, he had opened his laptop and booked a 5-star vacation to the Maldives. He was using my money to celebrate getting rid of me. I pictured him in the master bedroom right now. I pictured him showing Zoe the confirmation screen. "Pack your bags, baby, we are going to paradise. We deserve this. It has been a stressful year dealing with your dad." I pictured Zoe smiling, relieved that the tension was gone, relieved that she could escape the guilt of what she had done. I took another drink. The glass was empty. I poured another. They thought I was in a shelter eating soup. They thought I was crying on a cot. They had no idea that I was sitting in a penthouse holding the kill switch to their entire existence. I looked at the date on the transaction. The flight was tomorrow morning, first class, Emirates Airlines. Another $12,000 charged to a different card linked to the same account. He was going to wake up, eat a breakfast I paid for, drive a car I paid for to the airport and fly to a resort I paid for, all while thinking he was the king of the world. I felt a cold smile stretch across my face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a demolition expert who just realized the building is empty and the charges are set. "You want to go to the Maldives, Declan," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to sit on a white sand beach and drink cocktails and forget about the old man you pushed onto the floor." I tapped the keyboard. I pulled up the administrative access panel for King Ventures. I looked at the options: freeze assets, revoke credit lines, recall loans. I could do it all right now. I could turn off the lights tonight, but no, that would be too fast. That would be too merciful. I wanted him to feel it. I wanted him to taste the hope before I snatched it away. I wanted him to walk into that airport feeling like a millionaire and walk out feeling like a pauper. I checked the flight time, 10 a.m. That meant they would be checking in around 8. I checked my watch. It was midnight. I had 8 hours. 8 hours to set the stage. 8 hours to prepare the lesson. I closed the laptop, but I didn't turn it off. The screen glowed in the dim room, a blue eye watching, waiting. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow had stopped. The city was quiet. Somewhere down there in the dark, Declan was sleeping soundly. He was probably dreaming of turquoise water and overwater bungalows. "Sleep well, son," I said. "Sleep well, because when you wake up, the dream ends." I finished my whiskey. The warmth had spread all the way to my toes. The pain in my hip was still there, a dull throb reminding me of the fall. But the pain in my chest was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He told me to get out. He told me to find my own place. Well, I found it. And from this high vantage point, I could see everything. I could see the strings I had attached to his life. I could see the fragility of his ego. I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Sterling, my personal attorney. It was late, but Sterling answered on the first ring. He knew my number. He knew that when Otis King called after midnight, it wasn't to chat about the weather. Mr. King Sterling said, his voice crisp and alert. "Is everything all right?" I looked at the reflection of the old man in the window. He didn't look old anymore. He looked dangerous. "No, Sterling," I said. "Everything is wrong, but we are going to fix it. I need you to be ready at 8 a.m., I said. "Ready for what, sir?" I looked at the laptop screen one last time at the transaction for the Maldives. "I need you to cancel a vacation," I said. "And then I need you to foreclose on a life." Declan wanted a trip to remember. I was going to give him a journey he would never forget. The sun rose over Atlanta with a deceptive brilliance, painting the skyline in hues of violet and gold. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of the St. Regis penthouse, the city looked peaceful. It looked like a machine working in perfect harmony. But I knew better. I knew that down below in the veins of the banking system and the arteries of the data networks, a bomb was about to go off. I sat at the rosewood desk, a cup of black coffee steaming in my hand. My phone sat in the center of the leather blotter. It was 7:59 in the morning. I was not tired. I had not slept. I had spent the night reviewing ledgers, calculating interest rates, and remembering. I remembered the day Zoe was born. I remembered the day she married Declan. I remembered the pride I felt thinking I had gained a son. And then I remembered the gravy burning my skin and the cold wind on the porch. The digital clock on my laptop flipped to 8:00. I tapped the screen of my phone. Sterling answered on the first ring. He is a man who sleeps in a suit. He is 50 years old, white, with hair like silver wire and a mind like a steel trap. He has been my personal attorney for 20 years. He knows where the bodies are buried because he helped me dig the holes. "Good morning," Mr. King, Sterling said. His voice was crisp, professional, devoid of the sleepiness that plagued lesser men. "We are ready on your command." "Do it," I said. My voice was a rumble in my chest, deep and final. "Execute protocol," Severance Sterling asked, just to be sure. "Sever it all," Sterling, I said. "Cut the lines, every single one." I heard the sound of typing on the other end. It was a rhythmic staccato sound like a machine gun. "Let us start with the credit card," Sterling said, narrating the destruction as he wrought it. The black Amex issued to Declan Miller. The Visa signature issued to Zoe King Miller. The corporate expense account for Technova Solutions. I closed my eyes and pictured them. For 5 years, those cards had been magic wands for Declan and Zoe. They swiped, and things appeared. Designer clothes, dinners at Nobu, the Tesla in the driveway. They thought the bills were paid by Technova as non-existent profits or by some corporate bonus structure I had invented to spare their feelings. They never looked at the statements. If they had, they would have seen my name at the bottom of every payment. They would have seen that the money didn't come from Silicon Valley. It came from the sweat of an old architect who worked 70-hour weeks in the 80s. "Cards are frozen," Sterling confirmed. "Status changed to lost or stolen per your instruction. Fraud alerts activated." "Good," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Now the house." "This is the big one, sir," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. "The mortgage on the Lincoln Park estate is $2.8 million. You are the sole guarantor. The bank allowed Declan to be on the title only because your assets secured the loan." "Pull the guarantee," I said. Sir Sterling paused. "This will trigger an immediate acceleration clause. The bank will demand full repayment of the principal within 24 hours. If they cannot pay, foreclosure proceedings begin automatically. I know how contracts work, Sterling. I built half this city on contracts. Pull it. Understood. Revoking guarantor status now, notifying the bank. The electronic notice is sent." I heard the final keystroke. It sounded like a gavel hitting a block. "It is done," Mr. King, Sterling said. "The house is effectively in default. The credit lines are dead. The accounts are locked." "Thank you, Sterling," I said. "Keep your phone on. You are going to get some very angry calls soon." "I will handle them, sir. Enjoy your morning." I hung up. I looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, the signal was traveling. It was moving through fiber optic cables, bouncing off satellites, rushing toward a specific terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the itinerary I had hacked into last night. Emirates Flight 202 to Dubai, connecting to Malé. Departure time, 10 a.m. They would be at the check-in counter right about now. I closed my eyes and I let my imagination take me there. I didn't need a camera. I knew Declan. I knew his arrogance. I knew exactly how this scene would play out. I could see the bustling terminal, the noise, the smell of luggage and expensive perfume. Declan would be wearing his travel suit, probably Loro Piana, paid for by me. He would be pushing the cart with the Rimowa suitcases, also paid for by me. Zoe would be next to him wearing oversized sunglasses, looking like a celebrity trying to be incognito. They would bypass the long lines of economy class. Declan didn't do lines. He was a CEO. He was a visionary. He was a man who kicked his father-in-law out into the snow because he needed more legroom. They would walk up to the first-class counter. The agent, a young woman with a polite smile and a gold scarf, would greet them. "Passports, please," she would say. Declan would hand them over with a flourish. He would probably make a joke about the weather in Atlanta, about how glad he was to be escaping the cold. He wouldn't mention the old man he left freezing in it. "Checking in for 2 to the Maldives," the agent would say, typing on her keyboard. "I see you have the private suite booked. Excellent choice." Declan would smirk at Zoe. "See, baby, I told you. We deserve this." The agent would weigh the bags, heavy, full of new clothes for a new life. "I just need a credit card for the incidentals and the upgrade fee you selected online," the agent would say. Declan would reach into his wallet. He would pull out the black Amex, the heavy metal card that made a satisfying clack when he threw it on the counter. It was his symbol of power. He would slide it across the counter. The agent would pick it up. She would swipe it through the reader. I sat in the silence of the penthouse and waited. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. In the airport, the machine would beep. A harsh, discordant sound. The agent would frown. She would look at the screen. "I am sorry, sir," she would say, her voice dropping slightly. "This card has been declined." Declan would laugh, a short, incredulous bark. "That is impossible," he would say loud enough for the people in line behind him to hear. "That is a black card. There is no limit. Try it again. You probably swiped it wrong." The agent would smile tightly. She would swipe it again. Beep! Declan declined. "Do not honor." The agent would hand the card back. "I am sorry, sir, the system is rejecting it. It says you need to contact your bank. Do you have another form of payment?" Declan's face would start to turn red. The red of embarrassment, the red of anger. He would snatch the card back. "This is ridiculous," he would mutter. "Stupid machines." He would open his wallet again. He would pull out the Visa signature, the backup, the card he used for gas and groceries and gifts for Zoe. "Here, use this one," he would snap. "And hurry up, we have access to the lounge and I want a drink." The agent would take the Visa. She would insert it into the chip reader this time. Waiting. Beep. Transaction not authorized. Please contact issuer. The agent would look up, her professional mask slipping just a fraction. "Sir, I cannot process this card either. It has been flagged." Zoe would step forward, lowering her sunglasses. "Declan, what is going on?" "Nothing is going on," Declan would hiss. "Their system is down. It has to be." He would look at the line of people behind them. They were watching. They were judging. The man in the expensive suit couldn't pay. The visionary CEO was broke. "Try it again," he would shout, slamming his hand on the counter. "I have a credit limit of $100,000 on that card. Run it again." "Sir," the agent would say, her voice hardening, "if you yell at me again, I will call security. The cards are declined. If you cannot pay, I cannot issue the boarding passes." Declan would grab his phone. His hands would be shaking, not with cold like mine were last night, but with rage. "I am calling the bank," he would say. "Someone is getting fired for this." He would dial the concierge number on the back of the black card. He would put it on speakerphone because he wanted everyone to hear him berating the poor soul who answered. He would expect a groveling apology. He would expect an immediate fix. Instead, he would get a recording. Or maybe a fraud specialist. I could hear the conversation in my mind as clearly as if I were standing next to him. "Mr. Miller," the voice on the phone would say, calm and detached. "We see that the primary account holder has reported these cards as lost or stolen and has removed you as an authorized user." "Primary account holder?" Declan would stammer. "I am the CEO. This is my company card." "Actually, sir," the voice would correct him, "this is a supplementary card issued under the King Ventures corporate account. Mr. Otis King has revoked all privileges effective immediately." Otis. The name would hit him like a physical blow. Otis King. The old man. The burden. The clumsy fool who spilled gravy on the rug. Declan would look at the phone. He would look at Zoe. He did what he would whisper. "He canceled the cards, sir. All of them. And sir, there is a notification here regarding the travel booking. Since the tickets were purchased with a now voided card, the airline has canceled the reservation. Canceled. The vacation. The white sand. The escape. Gone." Declan would stand there in the middle of the busy terminal holding a useless piece of plastic while the reality of his life came crashing down around him. He wasn't a rich man. He was a man with a rich father-in-law, and he had just bitten the hand that fed him. I imagined him turning to Zoe. I imagined the look of panic in her eyes. "Dad did this," she would say, her voice trembling. "Why would Dad do this?" "Because we kicked him out." Declan would scream. He would lose control. He would forget where he was. He would scream right there in front of the Emirates counter, in front of the security guards, in front of the world. "That old man ruined my trip. He cut me off. He thinks he can do this to me." He would throw the phone on the ground. He would kick the suitcase. He would look like a toddler having a tantrum in a designer suit. And everyone would see. The facade was cracked. The emperor had no clothes and no credit. Back in the penthouse, I finished my coffee. It was cold now, but it tasted sweet. I checked my watch. 8:15. The show at the airport was probably concluding. Security would be escorting them out. They would be standing on the curb with their luggage, nowhere to go and no way to get there. Their car had been towed. I knew this because I had called the repo company myself at 7 a.m. The Tesla was leased under my name. I had reported it as being in the possession of an unauthorized driver. They were stranded. I stood up and walked to the bedroom. I had a busy day ahead of me. I needed to dress. Not in the cardigan. Not in the old slacks. I opened the closet. Hanging there in a garment bag I had brought with me was a suit I hadn't worn in 5 years. It was a charcoal gray three-piece bespoke suit cut by a tailor in Savile Row. It was the suit I wore when I negotiated the contract for the Midtown Tower. It was a suit of armor. I put it on. I tied the silk tie with a perfect Windsor knot. I polished my shoes until they gleamed like obsidian. I looked in the mirror. The old man with the sad eyes was gone. In his place stood Otis King, the architect, the builder, the landlord. My phone buzzed on the desk. I walked over and looked at the screen. Declan. Then another buzz. Zoe. Then another and another. The screen lit up with a relentless parade of notifications. Missed call, missed call, missed call. They were panicking. They were drowning, and they were reaching out for the only lifeline they had ever known. But the lifeline had been severed. I did not answer. I watched the phone buzz until it vibrated its way to the edge of the desk. 35 missed calls. I picked up the phone and slipped it into my pocket. I walked to the door of the penthouse. The eviction was just the beginning. The financial strangulation was the second step. Now it was time for the lesson. I opened the door and walked out into the hall. The elevator was waiting. I was going to pay a visit to a bank. And then I was going to reclaim my name. The steam room at the St. Regis smelled of eucalyptus and silence. It was a thick, heavy heat that wrapped around me like a blanket, penetrating deep into the joints that still ached from the hard floor of my own dining room. I sat there with my eyes closed, listening to the hiss of the steam jets. For the first time in 5 years, I was not listening to Declan bragging about a business deal that did not exist. I was not listening to Zoe complaining about the draft in the hallway. I was listening to nothing, and it was the most expensive sound in the world. I had turned my phone off. It was a conscious choice, a tactical maneuver. In war, you do not leave your radio open for the enemy to scream at you while you are reloading. You let them scream into the void. You let them panic. You let their imagination do the work for you. I spent 2 hours in the spa. I had a massage that worked the knot out of my hip. I had a shave with a straight razor performed by a barber who treated my face with more respect in 20 minutes than my family had in 20 years. When I walked back into the penthouse suite, I felt like a new man. I was wearing a plush white robe that cost more than Declan's entire wardrobe. I poured myself a glass of iced water with lemon. I walked to the rosewood desk where my phone lay silent and black like a dormant grenade. I sat down. I took a sip of water. I looked at the city skyline. It was almost noon. By my calculations, they had been stranded at the airport for 4 hours. 4 hours of confusion. 4 hours of embarrassment. 4 hours of realizing that the golden ticket they thought they held was just a piece of paper I had printed. I reached out and held the power button. The screen lit up. The Apple logo appeared white and clean. And then the vibration started. It was not a gentle buzz. It was a violent, continuous spasm. The phone danced across the leather blotter. Notifications cascaded down the screen in a waterfall of panic. 35 missed calls. I scrolled through them, slowly savoring the data. 12 from ungrateful daughter. 18 from Declan. 5 from unknown numbers, probably the airport police or the bank managers they were screaming at. There were text messages, too. A frantic stream of consciousness that told the story of their morning better than any spy satellite could. Dad, pick up. Dad, the cards are not working. Otis, what did you do? We are stuck at check-in. Everyone is looking at us. Answer the damn phone, old man. Please, Dad, I am scared. I am going to call the police if you do not answer. I leaned back in the chair. The police. That was rich. Declan wanted to call the police on the man whose money he had been stealing for half a decade. The phone buzzed again in my hand. It was Declan, calling for the 19th time. I let it ring twice. I took a deep breath. I channeled the voice of the chief architect, the man who could silence a room of contractors with a single look. I slid my finger across the screen. "Hello, Declan," I said. My voice was calm, smooth as the whiskey I had drunk the night before. Otis. It was a scream, a raw, guttural sound that cracked the speaker. "You crazy old lunatic. Where are you? What did you do?" I held the phone away from my ear slightly. He was hysterical. He was hyperventilating. I could hear the background noise of the airport, the announcements over the PA system, the murmur of the crowd. He was still there. He was still stuck. "I am enjoying a very pleasant morning, Declan," I said. "I just had a hot stone massage. Highly recommended for stress. You sound stressed, son." "Stressed," he roared. "Stressed. I am at the Emirates counter. They cut up my card. They cut up the black Amex right in front of me, Otis. They said it was reported stolen." "It was stolen," I said simply. "What are you talking about? I am the CEO. That is my card." No, Declan, I corrected him gently. That is a supplementary card issued to an authorized user on the King Ventures corporate account. That account belongs to me. And since you threw the account owner out into a blizzard last night, I figured you had resigned from your position as a beneficiary of my hard work. There was a moment of silence, a stunned, breathless pause. You own the account, he whispered. But the bank statements, they come to the office. They come to my office, Declan. The one you never visit because you are too busy playing pretend executive at the country club. I pay the bills. I pay the annual fees. I pay the interest on the debt you rack up buying suits you do not need to impress people who do not like you. He started sputtering again, trying to find footing on ground that had turned to quicksand. But the mortgage. The bank called me Otis. They called me 10 minutes ago. They said the guarantor has withdrawn. They said the loan is accelerated. They said they are foreclosing. How can they foreclose? I am on the deed. You are on the deed because I signed a piece of paper saying I would cover you if you failed, I said. I was the safety net. I was the foundation. You do not build a house on sand, Declan, and you certainly do not kick out the only pillar holding up the roof. I withdrew my guarantee. I told the bank I no longer have confidence in the borrower's ability to pay. And since you have zero income and a credit score that I have been artificially propping up for 5 years, they agreed with me. You cannot do this, he screamed. This is illegal. This is financial abuse. Financial abuse. I laughed. A low, dark sound. Financial abuse is living in a $3 million mansion while the man who paid for it sleeps in a guest room. Financial abuse is taking my Cadillac and selling it to buy a Charger for a car you cannot afford. Financial abuse is eating my food, drinking my wine, and then pushing me onto the floor because you think you are the man of the house. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. You wanted to be the big man, Declan. You wanted the head of the table. You said that seat belonged to the provider. Well, provide. Pay the mortgage. Pay the credit card bill. It is $43,000 this month, by the way. I hope you enjoyed those dinners at Le Bernardin because you are paying for them now. Dad. It was Zoe's voice. She must have grabbed the phone from him. She sounded terrified. She sounded small. Dad, please stop. This isn't funny. We are stranded. They took our bags off the plane. We cannot even get an Uber because the account is linked to your card. We are stuck at the curb. I closed my eyes. It hurt to hear her like this, but pain is a teacher, and Zoe had missed a lot of lessons. You are not stuck, Zoe, I said. You have legs. Start walking. It is a long walk back to a house you no longer own, but maybe the fresh air will help you think. Dad, why are you doing this? She sobbed. Over a chair? You are doing all this over a stupid chair. It is not about the chair, Zoe, I said, my voice turning hard as granite. It is about the disrespect. It is about the silence. You stood there and watched him push me. You watched your husband assault your father, and you worried about the rug. You chose him. You chose the lifestyle. You chose the lie. So now you get to live in the lie. But you have to pay for it yourself. Otis, listen to me. Declan was back on the phone, panting. You have to fix this. The flight, the tickets. We lose the reservation if we do not board. That trip cost $20,000. You cannot just throw that money away. I smiled. It was the smile of a man who held all the aces. I am not throwing money away, Declan. What do you mean? Those tickets, I said. The first-class suites on Emirates. The champagne. The caviar. You thought I paid cash for those, didn't you? You didn't. No, son. I paid with points. American Express Platinum points. 4 million of them. Points I have been accumulating since 1985. Points I earned flying economy to construction sites in the middle of nowhere while I was building this family as future. I paused, letting the information sink in. I called the airline this morning at 8:01. I canceled the booking. I got my points back. Every single one. There is no money lost. Just my points returned to their rightful owner. You canceled them, he whispered. I did. I am thinking of using them myself. Maybe go to Tokyo. I have always liked Japanese architecture. Or maybe I will just keep them. But you are not going anywhere. Otis, wait, he begged. Wait, we can talk. I will apologize. I will give you the chair. You can sit wherever you want. Just turn the cards back on. Please. We have no way to get home. Home, I asked. What home? The bank is coming for the keys, Declan. The power company is going to cut the lights by noon because I stopped the auto pay. The water is going to be shut off. I looked at the view of the city one last time. You said you paid the utility bills. You said you were the man. Prove it. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear him screaming my name, a tiny, tinny sound of desperation. Otis. Otis, do not hang up. I looked at the red button on the screen. Goodbye, Declan, I said to the empty room. I pressed the button. The line went dead. The silence returned to the penthouse. I sat there for a moment feeling the weight of what I had done. It was heavy. It was brutal. But it was necessary. They had tried to bury me. They had tried to erase me. But they forgot that I was the one who drew the blueprints. I knew where the load-bearing walls were, and I knew exactly which pillar to pull to bring the whole rotten structure down. I stood up. I adjusted my silk tie. I had a meeting at the bank in an hour, and then I had a meeting with a real estate agent. Declan and Zoe were at the airport with no money, no ride, and no home. My work had just begun. The taxi smelled of stale cigarettes and pine air freshener, a cheap masking agent for a rotting reality. It was a yellow cab with worn shocks that groaned over every pothole in the asphalt. It was not the sleek black Uber or the climate-controlled Tesla Declan was used to. It was the only ride they could get with the $40 cash Zoe had scrounged from the bottom of her purse. I watched the GPS tracker on the Tesla app from my suite. The car was sitting in an impound lot in South Atlanta. Declan and Zoe were sitting in the back of a rattling taxi, humiliated and exhausted, heading back to a house that was already rejecting them. They arrived at the mansion just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, cold shadows across the snow I had walked through the night before. The house was dark, not just quiet, but dead. The security lights did not flick on. The porch lantern was black. Declan stepped out of the taxi, shivering in his thin designer suit. He looked at the house. He looked at the dark windows. The power, he whispered. He cut the power. Zoe climbed out, dragging her heavy suitcase. She looked broken. He paid the bills, she said softly. You told me you paid them, Declan. You yelled at him at the table about how you paid the bills. I do pay them, Declan snapped, trying to regain some shred of authority. It is an autopay glitch. The bank system is down. It has to be. He marched up the steps and punched the code into the smart lock. Nothing happened. The electronic keypad was dead. The battery backup I had installed 5 years ago had finally drained, and I had not replaced it because I knew this day was coming. He kicked the door. He cursed. He threw his shoulder against the wood the same way he had thrown his shoulder into me, but the door did not budge. It was solid oak. It was built to withstand storms and thieves and angry little men. They had to break a window in the mudroom to get in. I watched the security feed switch to night vision as they stumbled into the kitchen. They looked like burglars in their own home. The house was freezing. The smart thermostat was offline. The radiant floor heating was dead. They spent that night huddled under expensive duvets in the master bedroom, shivering in the dark, unable to charge their phones, unable to cook food, unable to escape the silence. They were living the reality I had protected them from for years. They were cold, they were hungry, and they were afraid. I slept soundly in the St. Regis. The next morning came with a hard, bright light that exposed everything. I woke up at 6, ordered eggs, Benedict, and checked the camera feed. Declan was pacing the living room. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess. He was holding his dead phone, trying to get a signal, trying to understand why his world had stopped spinning. At 9 o'clock sharp, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. It was not a taxi. It was a Mercedes S-Class. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than Declan's car. He carried a leather briefcase. It was Samuel Henderson, the regional director of First City Bank. Sam and I go back 40 years. We played poker on Friday nights before our knees got bad. He was the one who approved my first loan when every other bank in Atlanta saw a black man with a blueprint and showed him the door. Sam knew honor, and he knew a rat when he smelled one. I watched on the monitor as Sam walked up the steps. He did not knock. He rang the old mechanical doorbell I had installed for nostalgia. Declan opened the door. He looked relieved. He thought Sam was there to fix the glitch. He thought Sam was there to apologize. Mr. Henderson, Declan said, smoothing his wrinkled shirt, trying to summon the arrogance of a CEO. Thank God. Your bank is a disaster. My cards are down. My accounts are locked. I was about to call my lawyers and sue you for damages. Sam did not smile. He did not offer his hand. He walked past Declan into the foyer as if he owned the place. In a way, the bank did. Mr. Miller. Sam said, his voice deep and gravelly. We need to talk. He walked into the living room and placed his briefcase on the coffee table. He did not sit down. He stood there towering over Declan, who was slumped on the sofa. Zoe came down the stairs wrapped in a blanket, looking like a ghost. Who is this? Zoe asked. This is the bank manager, Declan said, waving a dismissive hand. He is here to fix the mess Otis made. Sam opened the briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of documents. I am not here to fix anything, Mr. Miller, Sam said. I am here to collect. Collect? Declan laughed nervously. Collect what? I have a platinum business account. I have a line of credit. You had a line of credit, Sam corrected him. He slid a document across the table. It was a single sheet of paper with a lot of zeros on it. Technova Solutions has been operating on a $5 million revolving line of credit for the past 4 years, Sam said. That credit was secured by a personal cash collateral deposit provided by Mr. Otis King. Declan stared at the paper. Collateral, he whispered. Otis. Mr. King withdrew his collateral yesterday morning at 8:05 a.m., Sam continued. Under the terms of the agreement, the bank has the right to recall the loan immediately if the security is removed. So what Declan stammered. So, put it back. Call him. Tell him to put it back. Mr. King is no longer associated with your company, Sam said. And without his $5 million sitting in our vault, Technova Solutions is not a company. It is a liability. Sam slid another paper across the table. This one was printed in red ink. We ran an audit of your accounts this morning, Mr. Miller. Without Mr. King, is money covering the spread, your operating account is currently overdrawn by $450,000. $450,000. Zoe gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. That is impossible, Declan shouted, jumping up. We have revenue. We have clients. I have meetings all day. You have expenses, Sam said, cutting him off. You have leases on equipment you do not use. You have salaries for staff that do nothing. You have travel expenses that rival a Fortune 500 company. You have been burning cash, Mr. Miller. Otis King is cash. Declan sank back onto the sofa. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and ashy. He thought he was a genius. He thought he was a captain of industry. He thought the money in the account appeared because he was brilliant. He never looked down to see whose shoulders he was standing on. He was a dwarf standing on a giant, his back, convinced he was flying. So what happens now? Declan asked, his voice barely a squeak. Now, Sam said, closing the briefcase with a snap. You pay. Pay. Declan laughed hysterically. I do not have $450,000. You cut my cards. You froze my accounts. Then we begin asset seizure, Sam said calmly. He looked around the room. He looked at the grand piano I bought for Zoe. He looked at the artwork I collected. The bank will place a lien on all business assets, servers, computers, intellectual property, and since you signed a personal guarantee for the overdraft protection. I didn't sign that, Declan shouted. Otis signed everything. Check the signature on page 4, Sam said. Declan grabbed the document. He flipped the pages frantically. His eyes scanned the fine print, and there it was, his signature. A flamboyant, loopy scrawl he had signed 3 years ago when he was feeling important, when he wanted to feel like the boss. I had let him sign it. I had told him it was a formality. I knew that one day he might need to learn the weight of ink on paper. We will be placing a lien on your personal assets as well, Sam said. Any vehicles not leased, any jewelry, any savings? We have nothing, Zoe whispered. We have nothing. Sam looked at her. His eyes softened just a fraction. He had known Zoe since she was a baby. He had given her lollipops at the bank drive-thru. Then I suggest you vacate the premises, Sam said. The foreclosure notice on the house was filed this morning. You have 48 hours to remove personal effects. Anything left behind will be auctioned to cover the debt. But where do we go? Zoe sobbed. This is our home. This was Otis. King is home, Sam said, putting his hat back on. You were just guests, and guests who abuse the host eventually get evicted. Sam turned to leave. He walked to the door, his footsteps heavy and authoritative. Wait! Declan yelled, running after him. Wait. You can't do this. I know people. I will call the press. I will tell them you are destroying a minority-owned business." Sam stopped. He turned slowly. He looked at Declan with a mixture of amusement and disgust. "Technova is not a minority-owned business, son," Sam said. "You are white. And Mr. King, well, Mr. King just divested. And as for the press," Sam added, opening the door, "I think they would be very interested to hear how a young CEO spent $500,000 of his father-in-law as money on vacations while claiming to be a self-made man." Sam walked out into the cold morning air. Declan stood in the open doorway, the freezing wind blowing into the house he had lost. He looked small. He looked fragile. He looked like exactly what he was, a fraud. I watched it all from the hotel room. I watched him crumble. I watched him turn to Zoe and scream, not in anger, but in pure terror. "What are we going to do?" he shrieked. "What are we going to do?" Zoe did not answer. She just sat on the floor, wrapped in her blanket, and cried. I closed the laptop. The bank run was complete. The financial foundation was gone. But I wasn't done. Because Declan still had one card left to play. He still had his pride. He still thought he could scheme his way out of this. He thought he could manipulate the system. He was about to try the dirtiest trick in the book, and I was going to be waiting for him. I picked up the phone and dialed Sterling. "They are desperate, Sterling," I said. "Yes, sir," Sterling replied. "Desperate men do foolish things." "Exactly," I said. "Be ready. They are going to try to come for my mine next." I stood up and walked to the mirror. I adjusted my tie. I was 75 years old. I had just destroyed my son-in-law's company and evicted my daughter, and I had never felt more lucid in my life. I watched them from the comfort of the St. Regis penthouse. My laptop screen was the window into a cage where two rats were turning on each other. The feed from the hidden camera in the living room was grainy in the low light, but the audio was crystal clear. The mansion was freezing. The smart thermostat was dead, and the backup generator had not kicked in because I had disabled the fuel line remotely 3 hours ago. Declan was pacing back and forth in front of the cold fireplace. He was wearing his cashmere overcoat inside the house, a scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. He looked like a man who had been shipwrecked. Zoe was sitting on the sofa, her knees pulled up to her chest, wrapped in 3 different blankets. She was shivering, but I knew it wasn't just from the temperature. It was the fear. The crushing weight of a reality she had never been forced to navigate. They had been arguing for an hour. It wasn't the passionate arguing of a couple fighting for their marriage. It was the vicious, panicked snapping of 2 drowning people trying to climb on top of each other to breathe. "He ruined us." Declan spat, kicking the leg of the coffee table. "The old man ruined us. 450,000 in debt, Zoe. Do you know what that means? It means prison. It means they take everything. They take the watch. They take the clothes. They take your jewelry." I did not know. Zoe sobbed, her voice muffled by the blankets. "You told me the company was making millions. You told me Dad's money was just a bonus. You lied to me, Declan. I lied to protect you," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I lied because you wanted the lifestyle, you wanted the vacations, you wanted the country club membership. Do not play the victim now, princess. You spent the money just as fast as I did." He stopped pacing. He stood in the center of the room, his breath coming in white puffs of condensation in the frigid air. He ran his hands through his messy hair. I could see the gears turning in his head, the desperate grinding gears of a con artist who has run out of cons, or so he thought. He looked at Zoe. His expression changed. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, reptilian calculation. It was the same look he had when he pushed me. "Wait," he whispered. "Wait a minute." What Zoe asked, sniffing. "He is crazy," Declan said. Zoe looked up, confusion clouding her tear-stained face. "What?" "Your father." Declan said, stepping closer to her. "Think about it, Zoe. The sudden mood swings, the aggression, throwing us out of the house, cutting off the money, canceling the cards. It is irrational. It is paranoid." "He is not crazy, Declan," Zoe said weakly. "He is angry. We humiliated him. You pushed him." "No," Declan insisted, kneeling in front of her, grabbing her shoulders. "Listen to me. He is 75 years old. He's been acting strange for months, forgetting things, getting confused, and now this violent outburst, this financial suicide." He leaned in closer, his eyes wide and manic. "It is dementia, Zoe. It has to be. He is losing his mind. He is not competent. He is a danger to himself and others." I sat in the hotel room, my hand gripping the glass of water so hard I thought it might shatter. Dementia. That was their play. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to beg. They were going to pathologize my justice. They were going to take my righteous anger and turn it into a medical diagnosis. They were going to strip me of my agency to save their own skins. But Dad has always been sharp, Zoe argued, though. I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. He remembers everything. He built skyscrapers, Declan. That was the past, Declan hissed. Look at him now. He is wandering around the city alone. He is spending money erratically. He is vindictive. Those are classic symptoms of early onset Alzheimer's or vascular dementia. He stood up and began pacing again, the plan forming rapidly in his mind. If he is incompetent, Declan said, his voice rising with excitement, then his decisions are invalid. The bank withdrawal, the cancellation of the cards, the foreclosure, all of it. If we can prove he was not in his right mind when he did those things, we can reverse it all. Zoe stared at him. Reverse it? Yes. We get a court order. We get an emergency guardianship. Conservatorship. Just like they do with those celebrities who go off the rails. If the court declares him incapacitated, the power of attorney reverts to his next of kin. He pointed a finger at her. To you, Zoe. You become the guardian. You get control of the accounts. You get control of the assets. You get control of King Ventures. I watched my daughter. I watched the battle play out on her face. I saw the morality I had tried to instill in her fighting against the desperate need for comfort. We cannot do that, Declan, she whispered. That is evil. He is my father. He is not crazy. He is just mad at us. If we do this, we take away his freedom. We take away his life. Declan stopped. He looked down at her. The mask of the loving husband fell away completely, revealing the predator underneath. You want to talk about freedom, he said, his voice dropped dead cold. If we do not do this, Zoe, we are going to be on the street in 24 hours. Real street, not a hotel, a shelter, and me. I am going to prison for fraud. And you know what happens then. He leaned down until his face was inches from hers. I will divorce you. Zoe flinched, as if he had slapped her. I will leave you, Zoe, he hissed. I will file for divorce tomorrow. I will tell everyone that you were the one spending the money. I will tell them you forced me into debt. I will leave you bankrupt, alone, and humiliated. You will be a middle-aged divorcee with nothing, working a register at Walmart to buy cat food. Zoe began to cry again, harder this time. No, Declan, please. Then do it, he roared. Save us. Save yourself. Sign the papers. Agree with the diagnosis. We just need a doctor to sign off on it. Once we have the medical certificate, the judge will grant the emergency order. We will have the money back by the weekend. We can pay the debt. We can keep the house. We can send him to a nice facility where he will be safe. Safe. He wanted to lock me away. He wanted to drug me into a stupor and steal the empire I built brick by brick. Zoe looked at him. She looked at the cold, dark room. She looked at her future. And she broke. I saw the light go out in her eyes. I saw the daughter I loved disappear, replaced by a frightened, desperate accomplice. Okay, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but the microphone picked it up. Okay, we will do it. Good girl, Declan said, smoothing her hair. Good girl. Now we need a doctor, not his regular guy. That man is too straight-laced. We need someone flexible. He pulled out his phone. The battery was dying, but he had enough juice for one call. I know a guy, he muttered, scrolling through his contacts. Dr. Thorne. He owes me a favor. He got in some trouble with prescription pads a few years ago, and I helped him smooth it over with some contacts at the club. He will sign anything for $5,000. He dialed the number. I turned up the volume on my laptop. Dr. Thorne, Declan said, his voice shifting instantly into a charming professional tone. It is Declan Miller. Yes. Long time. Look, I have a situation, a medical emergency involving my father-in-law. He paused, listening. Yes, very sad. Rapid decline, aggressive behavior, paranoid delusions. We need an emergency evaluation. But here is the thing, Doc. He is resistant. We need to do this. Quietly. We need a certificate of incapacity to get him into a facility for his own good. I listened to him lie. I listened to him paint a picture of a senile, dangerous old man. Yes, tomorrow would be perfect, he said. We will bring him in. Or we can trick him into coming. Maybe tell him it is for insurance. Perfect. And Doc, the usual consulting fee applies. Cash. Once we have access to the accounts. He hung up. He looked at Zoe with a triumphant grin. It is done. Thorne will see us tomorrow at 10. We just need to get the old man there. How, Zoe asked, wiping her eyes. He won't talk to us. He will talk to the bank, Declan said. I will have the bank tell him there is a discrepancy with the paperwork, something that requires a medical clearance for insurance purposes given his age. He is obsessed with money and order. He will show up. I sat back in my chair in the penthouse. So that was the plan, the dirty scheme, the nuclear option. They were going to trap me. They were going to lure me into a corrupt doctor's office, slap a label of dementia on my forehead, and strip me of my rights before lunch. I felt a cold anger in my gut. It wasn't the hot rage of the night before. This was different. This was the cold, calculated anger of a man who realizes he has no family left. Just enemies. Zoe had agreed. That was the part that hurt the most. She had hesitated, yes, but she had agreed. She chose the lie. She chose the comfort. She chose the devil she knew over the father who loved her. I reached for my glass of water, but my hand stopped. I looked at the screen. Declan was hugging her now, telling her it would all be fine, telling her they were going to win. You think you are clever, Declan, I whispered. You think you found the loophole. He thought he was setting a trap. He didn't know he was walking into a minefield. I picked up my phone. I dialed Sterling. It is happening, I said. The dementia play, Sterling asked. Yes, they hired a gun. Dr. Thorne. Do you know him? Sterling let out a dry laugh. Thorne. He is a hack. He lost his hospital privileges 3 years ago for overprescribing opioids. He is barely hanging on to his license. Perfect, I said. Otis Sterling said, his voice serious. If they get a signed certificate from a licensed physician, even a bad one, a judge might grant a temporary emergency order. It could freeze your assets for weeks while we fight it. It would be a mess. I know, I said. That is why we are not going to let it get to a judge. What are you going to do? Sterling asked. I am going to the appointment, I said. Otis, that is dangerous. If you walk into that office, if I walk into that office, I walk in as a victim, I said. But I am not walking out as one. I need a file, Sterling. I need everything you have on Dr. Thorne, malpractice suits, state board complaints, illegal prescriptions, everything. And I need it printed and bound by 8 a.m. I will have it couriered to the hotel, Sterling said. But Otis, are you sure you want to face them? I looked at the monitor one last time. Declan was asleep on the sofa, still wearing his coat. Zoe was staring into the cold fireplace, her eyes empty. I have to, Sterling, I said. I have to look them in the eye when the trap snaps shut. They want to prove I am incompetent. They want to prove I am confused. I am going to show them exactly how sharp my mind still is. I hung up. I closed the laptop. The game had changed. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my life. It was about my freedom. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., I wasn't just going to a doctor's appointment. I was going to a showdown. And I was going to bring the receipts. The text message from the bank arrived at 8:30 in the morning, just as I was finishing my coffee in the St. Regis penthouse. It was a generic automated reminder about an appointment for a mandatory health assessment required for high-value insurance renewal. But I knew it wasn't the bank. It was Declan. He had spoofed the number. He had set the stage. He was trying to be clever. I dressed slowly. I chose a navy suit this time with a crisp white shirt and no tie. I wanted to look relaxed. I wanted to look like a man who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. I picked up the leather folder Sterling had couriered over an hour ago. It was heavy. It felt like a brick in my hand. Inside was the ammunition I needed to end this charade. The Uber Black dropped me off in front of a medical strip mall on the outskirts of the city. It was not the kind of place where reputable medicine was practiced. The sign above the door was faded, the letters peeling in the winter sun. Dr. Marcus Thorne. General practice. Pain management. The words pain management were a red flag waving in the wind. I walked into the waiting room. It smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. The linoleum floor was scuffed. The magazines on the table were 3 years old. Declan and Zoe were already there. They were sitting in the corner, huddled together like conspirators. When I walked in, they jumped. Declan stood up too fast, smoothing his wrinkled suit. He looked terrible. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were wild, darting around the room. Zoe looked worse. She was pale, her hands trembling in her lap. She couldn't even look at me. Otis Declan said, his voice too loud in the quiet room. You made it. Good. We were worried you might get confused and go to the wrong place. I looked at him. I looked at the dark circles under his eyes. I know how to read a map, Declan, I said calmly. And I know how to read a text message. Right, well, Declan stammered. The bank insisted. Just a formality. You know how it is. Insurance premiums skyrocket at your age. We just need to tick a few boxes so we can get this sorted out. He was sweating. It was 65 degrees in the room and he was sweating. The receptionist called my name. Mr. King, the doctor will see you now. We are coming in too, Declan said quickly, stepping between me and the door. Family support. It is important. I didn't argue. I wanted them there. I wanted them to see it. We walked into the examination room. It was small and claustrophobic. Dr. Thorne was sitting behind a metal desk that looked like surplus from a high school. He was a thin man with greasy hair and hands that wouldn't stop moving. He was tapping a pen against a clipboard, a nervous rhythm that betrayed his guilt before he even spoke. Mr. King, Dr. Thorne said without standing up. Have a seat. I sat down. I placed the leather folder on my lap. Declan and Zoe stood behind me, hovering like vultures. So Thorne began looking at a file that I knew was empty. Your family tells me you have been experiencing some difficulties lately. Confusion, aggression, memory loss. Is that what they told you? I asked, my voice level. Yes, Thorne said. They are very concerned. They say you became violent 2 nights ago. That you threw them out of their own home during a snowstorm because you were confused about who owned the property. I wasn't confused, doctor, I said. I own the property. I have the deed. Thorne exchanged a look with Declan, a knowing look, a conspiratorial look. See, Declan whispered. He thinks he owns everything. Paranoid delusions. Right, Thorne said, scribbling something on his pad. Delusions of grandeur. Mr. King, I am going to ask you a few simple questions, just to test your cognitive function. Go ahead, I said. Who is the current president of the United States? I answered him. What year is it? I answered him. Count backwards from 100 by sevens. 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58, 51, 44, 37, 30, 23, 16, 9, 2. I rattled the numbers off faster than he could write them down. I saw his brow furrow. He wasn't getting the stumbling, confused answers he needed. He wasn't getting the senility he had been paid to find. He put the pen down. He sighed. He looked at Declan. Look, he said, dropping the professional facade. Sometimes these symptoms are intermittent. The patient can have moments of lucidity called sundowning in reverse, but based on the family history and the report of violent behavior, he opened a drawer and pulled out a form. It was already filled out. I am going to recommend an emergency temporary guardianship, Thorne said. In my professional opinion, Mr. King lacks the capacity to make financial or legal decisions. He is a danger to himself. He needs to be placed in a secure facility for observation. Zoe let out a small sob. She covered her mouth with her hand. It is for the best, Otis Declan said, his voice trembling with excitement. He was so close. He could taste the money. He could see the bank accounts unlocking. We will find you a nice place, a place with a garden. Zoe and I will handle the business. We will handle the house. You won't have to worry about anything ever again. Thorne picked up his pen. He hovered over the signature line. Once he signed that paper, I would be legally a ghost. My accounts would freeze. My lawyer would have to fight for weeks to get a hearing. In that time, Declan could drain everything. Doctor, I said. Thorne looked up annoyed. What? Before you sign that, I think you should look at this. I lifted the leather folder from my lap. I placed it on the metal desk. It made a heavy, solid sound. What is this? Thorne asked. It is a second opinion, I said. I opened the folder. The first page was a photograph. It was grainy but clear enough. It showed Dr. Marcus Thorne in the parking lot of a CVS pharmacy, handing a prescription pad to a known drug dealer. Thorne's face went white. The color drained out of him so fast I thought he might faint. Page 2. I continued flipping the sheet. A copy of a bank transfer from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. $50,000 deposited into your personal account 3 years ago. The same week you cleared a construction foreman for duty after he suffered a seizure on a crane. He killed 2 people the next day, doctor. Did you know that? Thorne stopped breathing. His pen hovered in the air, frozen. "Page 3, I said. "This one is my favorite. It is a sworn affidavit from a former nurse of yours. She details exactly how much you charge for a signature, $5,000 for a backdated sick note, $10,000 for a disability claim, and apparently $5,000 for a dementia diagnosis." I looked at Declan. He was staring at the folder, his mouth open, his eyes bulging. He realized the trap had snapped, but it hadn't caught his leg. It had caught his throat. "Where did you get that?" Declan whispered. "I have resources, son," I said without looking at him. I kept my eyes on the doctor. "Dr. Thorne," I said, leaning forward. My voice dropped to a whisper, a dangerous whisper. "You have a choice. A very simple choice. You can sign that paper declaring me incompetent. If you do, my lawyer, who is standing outside in the hallway right now, will walk into the state medical board office with the original copies of these documents. You will lose your license by lunch, you will be in handcuffs by dinner, and you will spend the next 10 years in a cell much smaller than this examination room." Thorne swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed violently. Or I continued. "You can take that form and put it in the shredder, then you can pull out a new form. A standard certificate of health. You will write that Otis King is in excellent physical and mental condition. You will certify that his cognitive faculties are superior for his age. You will sign it. You will stamp it. And then you will never speak to me or my family again." The room was silent. The only sound was the buzzing of a fluorescent light overhead. Declan lunged forward. "Don't listen to him, Doc. Those are fake. He is bluffing. Sign the paper. I will pay you double. I will give you 10,000. Thorne looked at Declan with pure hatred. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. He didn't say a word. He picked up the dementia form. He crumpled it into a ball. He threw it into the wastebasket. "No," Declan screamed. "No, you coward." Thorne opened his drawer. He pulled out a clean sheet of letterhead. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. He wrote quickly, "To whom it may concern, Mr. Otis King has undergone a full cognitive evaluation. He is alert-oriented and fully competent. No signs of dementia or cognitive decline were observed." He signed it. He stamped it. He pushed it across the desk toward me. "Now get out," Thorne rasped. "Get out of my office." I picked up the paper. I blew on the ink to dry it. I folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. "Thank you, doctor," I said. I grabbed the leather folder. I wasn't going to leave the evidence with him. I stood up. I looked at Zoe. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. She knew. She knew she had just watched her father dismantle her husband without raising his voice. "We are leaving," I said to her. Declan was leaning against the wall, looking like he was going to vomit. "This isn't over, Otis," he hissed. "We will find another doctor. We will fight this." "No, you won't," I said, "because now I have a certified medical document dated today proving I am sane. Any judge who looks at a petition from you now will see it for what it is. A desperate attempt by a broke son-in-law to steal from the man he assaulted." I walked to the door. "And Declan," I added, turning back. "The bank called me this morning. They were very interested to hear about the attempted fraud you just committed here." "I didn't commit fraud," he shouted. "Conspiracy to commit medical fraud is a felony, son, and I have the audio recording of you setting up this appointment on my phone." I tapped my pocket. I walked out of the office, leaving them in the smell of stale coffee and defeat. I walked out into the sunlight. Sterling was waiting by the car holding a briefcase. "Did he sign it?" Sterling asked. I handed him the paper. He signed it. "Good," Sterling said. "What now, sir?" "Now," I said, getting into the car. "We go to the office. I have a board meeting to prepare for." Because Declan Miller wasn't just my son-in-law. He was the CEO of a company I owned. And it was time to fire him. The glass walls of the Technova conference room offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, a view that I had designed 30 years ago. I stood in the hallway adjusting the cuffs of my bespoke charcoal suit. It was not the cardigan of a retiree. It was the armor of a titan. The wool was from Italy, the cut was from Savile Row, and the man inside it was ready for war. Beside me stood Sterling holding a briefcase thick with the death warrant of a career. Inside the boardroom, Declan was sweating. I could see him through the glass. He was standing at the head of the long oval table surrounded by 12 nervous shareholders. He was waving his hands, frantic and desperate, trying to plug the holes in a sinking ship with nothing but hot air. "We have a minor liquidity issue," Declan was saying, his voice muffled by the soundproof glass. "It is a banking error, a technical glitch with the primary lender. I have called this emergency meeting to authorize a bridge loan, just $500,000 to cover payroll and operations until the glitch is resolved. We are projected to double revenue by Q3. He was lying. He was lying to men and women who had trusted him with their capital. He was trying to use their money to pay back the debt he owed the bank before the foreclosure hit the public record. I looked at Sterling. He nodded once. I pushed the heavy glass doors open. They swung inward with a silent, heavy grace. The air conditioning in the room was set to 68 degrees, but Declan looked like he was standing in a sauna. He stopped mid-sentence. He turned. When he saw me, his face went through a complex gymnastics of emotions. Confusion, then annoyance, then that familiar arrogant rage. "Otis," he snapped. "What are you doing here? Security is downstairs. How did you get up here?" I did not answer. I walked into the room, my polished Oxfords clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. I did not walk like an old man with a bad hip. I walked like the chief architect inspecting a foundation. Declan stepped away from the presentation screen. His face turned red. "Get out," he hissed. "This is a closed board meeting. You are embarrassing me. Go wait in the lobby and I will call you an Uber. Oh wait, you do not have a phone anymore, do you?" The shareholders turned to look. They saw an elderly black man in an impeccably tailored suit standing with a quiet, terrifying confidence. They looked confused. They knew Declan's narrative about his senile father-in-law, but the man standing before them did not look senile. He looked dangerous. I walked past Declan. I ignored him completely as if he were a piece of furniture that had been placed inconveniently in a hallway. I walked to the head of the table. There was a chair there. The chairman's chair. It was empty. It had always been empty because the primary investor of Technova had never attended a meeting. Until today. I placed my hands on the back of the leather chair. Declan laughed. A high-pitched, nervous sound. "Otis, stop it. You cannot sit there. That seat is reserved for the representative of King Ventures, the venture capital firm that owns this company. You are delusional." I looked at him. I looked at the board members. "You really have a problem with people sitting in chairs you think belong to. You do not, you son," I said. I pulled the chair out. I sat down. Declan lunged forward. "That is it. I am calling security. You are trespassing. You are disrupting a corporate meeting." "Sit down, Declan," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cracked through the room like a whip. He froze. I looked at the board members. I recognized a few of them. Old money Atlanta. People who knew the name King, but didn't know the face. "Gentlemen and ladies," I said, smoothing my tie. "My name is Otis King." There was a murmur in the room, a shifting of papers. "I am the King in King Ventures," I said. Declan, his mouth dropped open. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. "No," he whispered. "No. King Ventures is a consortium. It is a Silicon Valley firm. You are just a retired architect." "I am the architect who built the building you are standing in, Declan," I said coldly. "And I am the architect who built this company. I provided the seed capital. I provided the Series A funding. I provided the credit lines you have been treating like a personal piggy bank for 5 years. I signaled to Sterling. He stepped forward and placed a stack of documents in front of each shareholder. Declan stared at me. His world was tilting on its axis. The old man he had kicked out of the house wasn't a dependent. He was the owner. "This is a lie," Declan shouted. "He is senile. He has dementia. I took him to a doctor yesterday. He is trying to steal my company. Read the bylaws," I said, pointing to the documents. "King Ventures holds 51% of the voting stock. I am the majority shareholder. I am the chairman of the board, and I am calling this meeting to order." The board members were reading the documents Sterling had distributed. I saw their eyes widen. I saw the shock turn to anger as they saw the numbers. "Item 1 on the agenda," I said, my voice steady and merciless. "The immediate termination of the CEO Declan Miller for cause." "Termination?" Declan screamed. "You cannot fire me. I founded this company." "You founded a PowerPoint presentation," I corrected him. "I funded the company. And according to the audit my team completed this morning, you have been busy." I picked up the remote control for the presentation screen. I clicked a button. Declan's revenue projections vanished. In their place appeared a spreadsheet, a forensic accounting of Declan's spending. "Embezzlement," I said, reading from the screen. "Corporate funds used for personal luxury vehicles. A Tesla Model S registered to the company but garaged at a private residence." I clicked again. "Misappropriation of assets. $15,000 for a vacation to the Maldives booked 2 days ago while the company was defaulting on vendor payments." I clicked again. "Fraud. falsifying expense reports to cover gambling debts at the Piedmont Driving Club. The room was silent. The shareholders were staring at the screen. They were staring at the evidence of their stolen money. Declan was shaking. He looked at the screen. He looked at me. "Otis, please," he whispered. "Don't do this. Not in front of them." "You did it in front of everyone, Declan," I said. "You humiliated me at Christmas dinner. You threw my suitcase in the snow. You told me I was a burden." I stood up. I leaned over the table. "I am not a burden, son. I am the landlord. And your rent is past due." I looked at the board. All in favor of the motion to terminate Mr. Miller effective immediately signify by saying aye. "Aye," said the man to my right. "Aye," said the woman at the end of the table. "Aye," said the entire room in a chorus of angry, betrayed voices. "The motion carries," I said. Declan stood there, stripped of his title, stripped of his power, stripped of his dignity. He was no longer a CEO. He was just a thief in a suit I had paid for. "Get out," I said. He didn't move. He stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "I will sue you," he hissed. "I will take everything. I will tell Zoe." "Zoe knows," I said. "She knows you tried to have me committed. She knows you hired a corrupt doctor, and she knows you are broke." "Security," I said, speaking into the intercom on the table. "Please escort Mr. Miller from the building." 2 large men in uniform walked in. They didn't look at Declan with respect. They looked at him like a trespasser. Declan pulled away from them. "Do not touch me," he screamed. "I am the CEO. This is my building." "It is Mr. King's building, sir," the guard said, taking Declan by the arm. They dragged him toward the door. He was kicking and screaming. He looked exactly like the child he was, a spoiled, entitled child who had finally been told no. As they hauled him out, he looked back at me. "I hate you," he screamed. "I hate you, old man." I watched him go. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel joy. I felt the cold satisfaction of a structural engineer watching a controlled demolition. The charges had detonated exactly as planned. The building had fallen into its own footprint. The doors closed. The screaming faded. I looked around the room. The shareholders were looking at me. They were waiting. They were wondering if the company could survive this. I sat back down in the chairman's chair. It was comfortable. It fit me perfectly. "Apologies for the theatricality," I said, adjusting my cuffs. "Now let us talk about how we are going to save this company. I have some ideas." I opened my folder. I was 75 years old. I had just fired my son-in-law. I had just destroyed my daughter's marriage. But as I looked at the blueprints for the restructuring plan, I felt a spark of the old fire. I was Otis King. I built things. And now I was going to build a future that didn't include parasites. The silence in the boardroom was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath before a scream. Declan was pinned against the wall by the 2 security guards, his expensive suit bunched up around his shoulders, his face a mask of sweating terror. The board members sat in their chairs, stiff and pale, their eyes glued to the presentation screen at the head of the table. I stood by the podium. I did not look at Declan. I looked at the men and women who had unwittingly financed his fantasy life. "I told you there was cause for termination," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "I told you there was embezzlement. But I believe in transparency. I believe you deserve to see exactly where your capital went. It did not go into research and development. It did not go into marketing. It went into the ego of a man who thought he was untouchable." I pressed the button on the remote. The screen flickered and changed. "Exhibit A," I said. A scanned invoice appeared on the massive 4K display. It was from a jeweler in Buckhead, Rolex Daytona, platinum, ice blue dial, price tag $75,000. The date on the invoice was 3 months ago. The payment method was listed clearly. Technova Solutions corporate account ending in 4099. Declan let out a strangled noise from the corner. That was a client gift," he stammered, his voice cracking. "It was for a prospective investor." I turned to him slowly. "Really?" I asked. "Because I checked the serial number Declan. I registered it with Rolex myself just this morning. The owner of record is not a client. It is Mr. Declan Miller." I clicked the remote again. A photo appeared. It was from Declan's own Instagram account, a picture of his wrist resting on the steering wheel of the Tesla, the watch gleaming in the sunlight. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. #CEO life." The shareholders muttered. One of them, an older woman with pearls, shook her head in disgust. Hard work, I repeated, or theft. I clicked the button again. Exhibit B. The screen changed to a series of Venmo transactions and Zelle transfers. They were all sent to a woman named Crystal V. The amounts were consistent, $2,000 every Friday, $3,000 on the first of the month. "Who is Crystal a board member?" asked his voice sharp. "Is she a contractor?" In a manner of speaking, I said dryly. I clicked again. A lease agreement appeared. It was for a luxury apartment in Midtown. The tenant was Crystal Vance. The guarantor was Technova Solutions. The monthly rent was $4,500. Declan began to struggle against the guards. "Stop it!" he screamed. "Stop it, Otis! This is private. You cannot show this. It is not private when you pay for it with shareholder money, son." I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a knife. "It is company business." I looked at the board members. Mr. Miller has been listing these payments as external consulting fees in the ledger. But I hired a private investigator. Ms. Vance is not a consultant. She is a 22-year-old aspiring model who curiously seems to accompany Mr. Miller on all his business trips to Miami. The room erupted. The shareholders were on their feet shouting. They were furious. They had been told the company was struggling because of market conditions. They had been told they needed to tighten their belts, and all the while the CEO was paying for a mistress with their dividends. I held up my hand. Silence fell again instantly. "I am not finished," I said. I clicked the button one last time. Exhibit C, a spreadsheet appeared. It was a log from an online betting site. DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM. The numbers were staggering. $10,000 on a Lakers game, $15,000 on the Super Bowl, $5,000 on a random Tuesday night fight in Vegas. Total losses for the fiscal year $212,000, all paid from the operating account, all hidden under miscellaneous marketing expenses. "You have a gambling problem, Declan," I said. "But the real problem is that you were gambling with money that did not belong to you." Declan slumped in the grip of the guards. The fight had gone out of him. He looked at the screen and he saw his life dismantled in high definition. He saw the lies stripped away, leaving only the ugly truth of his greed. "Get him out of here," the woman with the pearls shouted, pointing a trembling finger at him. "Get him out of my building." I looked at the guards. "You heard the lady," I said. "Remove him. And make sure he does not take anything with him. Not a laptop, not a phone, not a stapler. He leaves with the clothes on his back and nothing else." The guards hauled him upright. They didn't be gentle. They dragged him toward the double glass doors. Declan began to scream again. Not words, just sounds. The sounds of an animal caught in a trap. He kicked his legs, his expensive shoes scuffing the floor. They dragged him out of the boardroom and into the open plan office. I followed. The shareholders followed. The entire staff of Technova, about 40 people, were standing at their desks. They had heard the screaming. They were watching wide-eyed as their CEO was frog-marched through the bullpen. "Declan Miller, you are fired," I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the floor. "You are terminated for cause effective immediately. You are banned from these premises. If you return, you will be arrested for trespassing." Declan looked at his employees, the people he had bullied, the people he had lied to. He looked for sympathy. He found none. He saw only shock and contempt. And then the elevator doors pinged open. Zoe stepped out. She was out of breath. Her hair was messy. She was wearing the same clothes from yesterday. She had walked. Or maybe she had begged a ride. She had come to save him. She had come to try and fix it. She froze when she saw the scene. She saw two burly guards dragging her husband across the polished concrete floor. She saw the shareholders standing behind me looking like an execution squad. She saw me standing in the center of it all, calm and terrible in my charcoal suit. "Declan," she gasped. Declan saw her. He lunged toward her, straining against the guards. "Zoe, help me," he shrieked. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them your father is crazy. Do something." Zoe looked at him. She looked at his face, twisted with fear and entitlement. Then she looked past him. She looked through the glass walls of the conference room. The presentation was still up on the big screen. The invoice for the Rolex, the lease for the mistress, the gambling losses. She stared at the screen. Her mouth opened slightly. She blinked, trying to process the data, trying to reconcile the numbers with the lies her husband had fed her. He told her the company was making millions. He told her the money was his. She saw the name on the lease. Crystal Vance. She saw the dates of the transfers. Fridays. The nights he told her he was working late. The nights she sat at home alone waiting for him, thinking he was building their future. He wasn't building a future, he was buying a fantasy for himself. "Zoe," I said softly, stepping toward her. She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on Declan. "You," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "You spent it all." "Zoe, baby, listen to me," Declan pleaded, desperate now. "That is fake. Otis made it up. He is trying to break us up." "You bought her an apartment," Zoe said, her voice rising. "You bought a watch for $75,000. We do not have money for groceries, Declan. We do not have a home. And you bought a watch." She walked up to him. The guards paused, sensing the volatility of the moment. Zoe stopped inches from his face. She looked at the man she had chosen over her father, the man she had defended, the man she had let push me down. She didn't see a CEO. She didn't see a provider. She saw a leech. "You are not a businessman," she spat. "You are a parasite." Zoe Declan whimpered. "I defended you," she screamed. "I kicked my own father out for you. I stood by you when you threw his suitcase in the snow. I thought you were stressed. I thought you were working hard." She slapped him. It wasn't a calculated slap like the one I gave him with my words. It was a raw emotional explosion. It cracked through the silent office. "You cheated on me," she screamed. "You stole from my dad and you cheated on me with my money. Get him out of here," I ordered the guards. They dragged him into the elevator. Declan was crying now, sobbing like a child. "Zoe," he wailed as the doors slid shut, cutting off his voice. Zoe stood there in the lobby shaking. The employees were staring. The shareholders were staring. She looked at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, wild with pain and humiliation. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew all of this." I walked over to her. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to wrap her up and take her home. But I couldn't. Not yet. The lesson wasn't finished. "I knew he was spending money, Zoe," I said. "I didn't know about the girl until this morning. But yes, I knew he was a fraud. Then why didn't you tell me?" she cried. "Why did you let me marry him? Why did you let this happen?" "Because you wouldn't have listened," I said. "You were in love with the image, Zoe. You were in love with the suit. You had to see the man inside it." I gestured to the empty elevator. "Now you have seen him." She collapsed onto the floor, right there in the lobby of the building I owned. She buried her face in her hands and wept. It was the sound of a heart breaking not for a lost love, but for a lost self. She realized she hadn't just married a loser, she had become one. I stood over her. "Stand up, Zoe," I said, my voice stern. She looked up at me, startled by the tone. "Stand up," I repeated. "Kings do not crawl, and they certainly do not cry in the lobby of their own company." She wiped her face. She sniffled. She slowly climbed to her feet. "Go wait in the car," I said, pointing to the door where Sterling was waiting. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "We are going to the house," I said. But we got evicted," she said. "The bank. I bought the bank as debt, Zoe," I said, adjusting my cuffs. "I am the bank now, and we have an eviction to finish." I turned and walked back toward the boardroom, leaving her standing there amidst the ruins of her marriage. I had to thank the shareholders, I had to appoint an interim CEO, and then I had to go home. Because there was one more person I needed to evict from my life, the ghost of the man I used to be, the man who let them walk all over him. He was gone. Otis King was back, and he had a house to clean. The flashing blue lights of the sheriff cruisers bounced off the snowbanks, turning the front lawn of the mansion into a strobe-lit crime scene. It was a cold evening, the kind that freezes the breath in your throat before you can speak. I sat in the back of Sterling's car watching the scene unfold through tinted glass. I was not cold tonight. I was wearing my bespoke wool coat, the one I bought in Milan 10 years ago. It was heavy, warm, and armored against the elements and the emotions. Sheriff Brody tapped on the window. He was a big man with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen every lie a criminal could tell. He had known me for years. He knew I was a man of my word, and he knew the paperwork Sterling had filed this afternoon was ironclad. "We are ready, Mr. King." The sheriff said, his breath steaming in the air. "We have the warrant and the eviction order. Do you want to stay here?" "No," I said, opening the door. "I want to see this. I need to see this." I stepped out onto the driveway. The gravel crunched under my polished shoes. I looked up at the house. My house. The windows were dark except for the living room where a single lamp cast a frantic shadow moving back and forth. Declan was inside. He had broken back in after Sam the banker left. He was trying to salvage what he could, trying to pack the spoils of his theft before the walls came down. We walked up the steps, the same steps where my suitcase had landed in the slush 2 nights ago. The same steps where Declan had slammed the door in my face. Sheriff Brody pounded on the heavy oak door. "Open up, police!" There was a crash from inside, the sound of something breaking, then silence. "Open the door, Declan!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the wind. "Or they will break it down, and I am not paying to fix it this time." The lock clicked. The door swung open. Declan stood there. He looked deranged. His shirt was untucked, his tie loose, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was holding a Louis Vuitton duffel bag stuffed with silverware, my silverware, and electronics. "Get off my property," he screamed. "You have no right. This is harassment. I am calling my lawyer." "You do not have a lawyer, son," I said calmly, stepping into the foyer. "You cannot afford one. And even if you could, no lawyer in Atlanta would take your case after seeing the evidence I uploaded to the district attorney's server an hour ago." Declan dropped the bag. It hit the floor with a heavy metallic clatter. "This is my house," he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the floor. "My name is on the deed. I pay the mortgage. You are just a senile old man who thinks he is a tycoon. Get out. Get out now." Sheriff Brody stepped forward, unfolding a document. "Declan Miller, I have an emergency order of eviction issued by the Superior Court of Fulton County. This property belongs to the King Family Trust, solely administered by Mr. Otis King. You are trespassing." "Lies," Declan spat. "That is a lie. He forged it. He is a fraud. He has dementia. He does not know what he is signing." I walked past him. I walked into the living room. It was a mess. Drawers were pulled out, papers scattered everywhere. He had been looking for cash, looking for jewelry, looking for anything he could pawn to fund his escape. I stopped at the dining room entrance. I looked at the table. It was still set for the Christmas dinner that never finished. The dried gravy stain was still there on the rug. My chair was pushed back slightly as if waiting for me. I turned to Declan. "I do not have dementia, Declan. I have a receipt." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the deed. The original deed. The one I signed in 1978. "You see this?" I asked, holding it up. "This is the foundation. You thought you owned this house because I let you play make-believe. I let you put your name on a utility bill so you could feel like a man. But the title, the equity, the dirt underneath this floorboards, that has always been mine." Declan lunged. It was a desperate, animalistic move. He wanted to tear the paper from my hands. He wanted to destroy the proof of his failure. "Watch out," Sheriff Brody shouted. 2 deputies were on him instantly. They slammed him against the wall, his face mashed into the expensive wallpaper Zoe had picked out last year. "Get off me!" he screamed, kicking and thrashing. "I am the CEO. I am a victim here. He stole my company. He stole my life." Sheriff Brody pulled Declan's arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked. A cold mechanical sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged foyer. "Declan Miller, you are under arrest," the sheriff said, his voice booming. "Arrest." Declan gasped. "For what?" "Living in my own house." "For grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement," the sheriff listed the charges. "We have evidence that you misappropriated over $2 million of corporate funds from Technova Solutions. We also have a recording of you conspiring to commit medical fraud against a vulnerable adult." Declan stopped struggling. He went limp. The fight drained out of him, leaving only the terror of a man who realizes the safety net is gone. "Medical fraud," he whispered. "I recorded the call, Declan," I said, walking closer to him. "The call to Dr. Thorne. The bribe. The plan to lock me away. It is all on tape. And Dr. Thorne, he is currently in an interrogation room, cutting a deal to testify against you." Declan looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with tears of self-pity. "Otis, please. I am family. You cannot send me to jail. I will die in there." "You should have thought about that before you pushed me," I said. "You should have thought about that before you stole my retirement. You should have thought about that before you tried to erase me." "Take him away, Sheriff." The deputies began to drag him toward the door. He was sobbing now, loud, ugly sobs that racked his body. "Zoe! Zoe, help me!" he wailed. "Call someone! Do not let them take me!" Zoe. I had almost forgotten her. She had come in with me, trailing behind Sterling like a shadow. She was standing by the stairs, clutching the banister, her knuckles white. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn to the airport, the expensive travel outfit now wrinkled and sad. She watched her husband being hauled out into the night. She watched the man she had chosen over her father being cuffed like a common criminal. She didn't move to help him. She didn't scream at the police. She just stood there shaking. When the door closed behind Declan, leaving only the flashing blue lights dancing on the walls, Zoe turned to me. She looked at me, and then she looked at the floor. She couldn't meet my gaze. "Daddy," she whispered. I stood in the center of the foyer, my hands in my pockets. I did not go to her. I did not open my arms. "Daddy." "I did not know," she said, her voice trembling. "I swear. I did not know he was stealing. I thought the money was real. I thought the business was doing well." "You knew enough, Zoe?" I said, my voice flat. "No," she cried, running down the few steps to stand in front of me. "He lied to me. He told me you were confused. He told me you were sick. He said the guardianship was to help you. He said we were saving you." "Saving me?" I asked. "By locking me up, by taking my money. He forced me," she sobbed, reaching out to grab my coat sleeve. "He said he would leave me. He said I would be homeless." I was scared, Daddy. I was so scared. I looked at her hand on my sleeve. It was the hand of a woman who had never worked a day in her life because I had made sure she didn't have to. It was the hand of a woman who had let her husband throw my suitcase into the snow because she was afraid of losing her heated floors. "Fear is not an excuse for betrayal, Zoe," I said, pulling my arm away. She recoiled as if I had burned her. "Daddy, please. I am your daughter. I am your baby." "You were my daughter," I said. "But last night when I was lying on that floor covered in food and pain, you were not my daughter. You were his wife. You chose your side." "But he is gone now," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "He is in jail. It is just us. We can go back to how it was. I will take care of you. I will make it up to you." "Go back?" I asked. "To what? To you, pretending to love me while spending my money? To you, watching me eat at a folding table? No, Zoe, we cannot go back. The foundation is cracked. The house is condemned." "What are you saying?" she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "I am saying this house is closed," I said. "But where will I go?" she asked, looking around the foyer as if the walls themselves were dissolving. "I have nowhere. He spent all our money. The accounts are frozen. I have nothing. You have your health," I said. "You have 2 hands. You have a college degree I paid for." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a white envelope. It wasn't thick. I handed it to her. "What is this?" she asked, taking it with trembling fingers. "It is a bus ticket," I said. "To your aunt is house in Birmingham. She agreed to take you in for a month." "Birmingham," she gasped. "But my life is here, my friends, my club. Your life here was a lie, Zoe. A lie funded by me, and the funding has stopped. Daddy, you cannot do this. You are rich. You have millions. You can buy me a condo. You can help me start over." "I could," I said, "but I won't. Because if I buy you a condo, you will never learn. You will just find another Declan. You need to learn what it feels like to stand on your own feet, Zoe. You need to learn the value of $1 you earned yourself." I walked past her toward the door. The sheriff was waiting by the car. The show was over. "Daddy," she screamed, dropping the envelope. "Don't leave me here. It is cold. The power is out." "The taxi to the bus station will be here in 10 minutes, I said, without looking back. "I paid for it. It is the last thing I will ever pay for you until you pay me back." "Pay you back?" she asked, her voice hysterical. "How?" "It is hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Figure it out," I said. I stepped out into the night. The air was crisp and cold, but I felt warm. The weight on my chest was gone. I heard her crying behind me, a lonely, desperate sound echoing in the empty mansion. I got into the car. "Drive Sterling," I said. As we pulled away, I saw Zoe standing in the doorway, the silhouette of a woman who had lost everything because she didn't appreciate anything. She was alone, just like she had left me alone in the snow. The cycle was broken. The lesson had been delivered. Now it was time to rebuild. Not the house, but my life. The heavy oak door clicked shut and the silence rushed back into the foyer like water filling a sinking ship. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers faded into the distance, leaving only the cold moonlight spilling through the high windows. The house was freezing. The smart thermostat was dead and the air inside was stale, carrying the faint, lingering scent of the expensive cologne Declan had worn while they dragged him away in handcuffs. I stood in the center of the room, my hands buried deep in the pockets of my wool coat. I did not feel the cold. My anger kept me warm. My resolve was a fire that had burned away the confusion and the hurt, leaving only clarity. Zoe stood by the staircase. She looked like a ghost in her wrinkled designer clothes. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She was trembling violently, but I knew it was not just from the temperature. It was the shock. It was the sudden, violent removal of the delusion she had been living in for 5 years. She looked at the door where her husband had just exited in chains. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wide and terrified, like a child who has dropped a vase and is waiting for the shouting to start. But I did not shout. I had no yelling left in me. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice cracking in the empty space. "He is gone." They took him. I did not answer. I just watched her. I watched the woman I had raised, the girl I had carried on my shoulders when she was too tired to walk, the teenager I had taught to drive in the parking lot of the church. I looked for that girl in the woman standing before me, but I could not find her. She was buried under layers of entitlement and fear. "It is just us now," she said, taking a hesitant step toward me. "Just you and me, Daddy. We can fix this. We can go back to how it was." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the marble floor. "Go back?" I asked softly. "Go back to what, Zoe? To you pretending I do not exist until you need a check signed? To you watching me eat at a folding table in the kitchen like the help?" "No," she sobbed, shaking her head frantically. "No, never again. I am so sorry. I swear I am so sorry. I love you, Daddy. You know I love you." I looked at the spot on the floor near the dining room entrance. The rug was gone, rolled up and taken away by the cleaners, but I could still see the stain in my mind. I could still feel the hard wood against my hip. I could still feel the heat of the gravy burning my skin. I walked over to that spot. I stood there looking down. "Do you remember Christmas Eve, Zoe?" I asked, my voice low and steady. She flinched. "I do not want to talk about that." "We are going to talk about it," I said. "We are going to talk about the moment you decided who you really were." I pointed to the floor. "I was lying right here," I said. "Your husband, the man you swore to honor and cherish, had just physically assaulted me. He pushed an old man down. He threw food on me. He humiliated me in front of strangers, in front of guests in my own house." I looked up at her, meeting her teary eyes. "And I looked for you, Zoe. I looked for my daughter. I looked for the blood of my blood. I thought you would scream. I thought you would run to me. I thought you would hit him. I thought you would do something, anything, to protect your father." Zoe covered her face with her hands, sobbing into her palms. "But you did not do any of those things." I continued, my voice rising slightly. "You stood there, you held your wine glass, and you looked at me with annoyance. You were worried about the rug. You were worried about the scene. You turned your back on me, Zoe. You watched me struggle to get up, and you turned your back." "I was scared," she wailed, dropping her hands. "I was so scared, Daddy. You do not understand. He has a temper. He screams. He throws things. I was afraid. Afraid of what I asked, stepping closer to her. Afraid he would hit you." She hesitated. "No, he never hit me. But he yells. He gets so angry." "You were not afraid of his anger, Zoe," I said, cutting through her excuse like a scalpel. "You were afraid he would leave you." She froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "You were afraid the fantasy would end," I said relentlessly. "You were afraid that if you stood up for me, if you took the side of the old man in the cardigan, you would lose the handsome CEO husband. You would lose the Tesla. You would lose the vacations to the Maldives. You would lose the status." "No," she whispered. "That is not true." "It is true," I said. "You did not see a husband abusing a father. You saw a threat to your lifestyle, and you made a calculation. In that split second when I hit the floor, you did the math. You decided that the man who paid for the purse on your arm was more important than the man who gave you life." "Daddy, please," she begged, reaching out to grab my sleeve. "He manipulated me. He gaslighted me. He told me you were sick. He told me it was for your own good, and you believed him because it was convenient," I said, pulling my arm away from her touch. "It was easier to believe I was senile than to admit your husband was a monster. It was easier to sign a paper locking me away than to get a job and pay your own bills." I walked around her, circling her like a prosecutor in a courtroom. "You fear losing a bad husband more than you fear losing the father who raised you," I said. "That is the truth, Zoe. That is the ugly, naked truth standing in this cold room with us." She sank to her knees on the hard floor. The fabric of her expensive pants tore slightly. She looked up at me, her face a mask of ruin. "I made a mistake," she choked out. "A terrible mistake. But people make mistakes. You have to forgive me. You are my dad. Fathers forgive." I looked down at her. I felt a pang of pity deep in my chest, a dull ache for the child she used to be. But pity is not forgiveness, and love is not a doormat. "Fathers forgive mistakes, Zoe," I said. "If you crashed the car, I would forgive you. If you failed a class, I would forgive you. If you married a fool, I would forgive you." I leaned down, my face inches from hers. "But betrayal is not a mistake. It is a choice. You chose silence," I whispered. "On Christmas Eve, when the snow was falling and I was walking down that driveway alone, you chose silence. You stayed in the warmth. You drank the wine. You let him lock the door. That silence cut the cord, Zoe. It cut the bond between us. It did more damage than Declan's hands ever could. He broke my hip, but you broke my heart." She reached for my hand, but I stood up straight, moving out of her reach. "Daddy, do not say that," she screamed. "Do not say it is over. I have nothing. He spent it all. The bank took everything. I have nowhere to go." I looked around the empty room. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, reaching for us. "You have the consequences of your choices," I said. "You wanted to be an adult, Zoe. You wanted to be the lady of the house. Well, this is what adulthood looks like. It is cold, it is hard, and sometimes you have to pay the bill." I walked toward the door. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silence. "Where are you going?" she cried, scrambling to her feet. "You cannot leave me here. The power is out. It is freezing." I stopped at the threshold. I turned back one last time. "I am going to a hotel," I said. "A warm hotel where the staff treats me with respect because I pay them, not because we share blood. But what about me?" she asked, her voice rising to a panic. "What do I do?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope I had prepared. I tossed it onto the entry table. It landed with a soft slide. "There is a bus ticket in there," I said. "And the address of a woman is shelter in Birmingham, near your aunt's house. She is expecting you. She said you can stay for a month if you follow her rules. Get a job, pay rent, no whining." "A shelter," she gasped. "A bus. I cannot take a bus. I am Zoe King." "No," I said. "Zoe King was a strong woman who volunteered at the library and wanted to be a teacher. I do not know who you are anymore, but the woman standing in front of me is Mrs. Declan Miller, and she needs to learn how to survive." I opened the heavy front door. The night air rushed in, biting and clean. "Goodbye, Zoe," I said. "Daddy, wait!" she screamed, running toward me. I stepped out and pulled the door shut. I heard the lock click. I heard her fists pounding on the heavy wood. I heard her muffled screams calling my name. "Daddy, Daddy, please, open the door." I stood on the porch for a moment, listening. It sounded exactly like the wind howling on Christmas Eve. I walked down the steps. I did not look back at the window. I did not look back at the house I had built. Sterling was waiting by the car, the engine running the heat on. He opened the back door for me. "Is it done, sir?" he asked as I slid into the warm leather seat. "It is done," I said. He closed the door. The sound of Zoe's screaming was cut off, instantly replaced by the hum of the engine and the soft jazz playing on the stereo. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I was tired. I was older than I had ever felt, but I was free. I had lost a daughter, but I had regained my self-respect. And as the car pulled away, leaving the dark mansion behind in the rearview mirror, I knew that was a trade I had to make, because sometimes you have to burn the house down to see the sunrise. The envelope lay on the mahogany entry table, white and crisp against the dark wood. It looked like an invitation to a party, but we both knew it was a summons to reality. Zoe stared at it as if it were a loaded gun. Her hands were shaking so badly that when she finally reached for it, her fingernails clicked nervously against the tabletop. "Open it," I said. My voice was devoid of the warmth she was desperate to hear. It was the voice of a man closing a deal that had gone bad. She picked it up. She tore the flap with clumsy, desperate fingers. I saw the hope in her eyes. Even after everything, even after the eviction and the arrest and the shouting, she still thought there was a check inside. She still thought Daddy was going to fix it with a signature. She thought there would be a platinum card or a stack of hundreds to tide her over. She expected a parachute. She pulled out the contents. It was not a check. It was a single Greyhound bus ticket printed on cheap thermal paper and a folded brochure for the Birmingham Workforce Development Center. She stared at the ticket. She turned it over as if the money might be taped to the back. There was nothing. Just the departure time, 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. "What is this?" she whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle like dried leaves. A bus ticket to Birmingham. And a job center. "It is a start, Zoe," I said. A start. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and a rising panic. "Daddy, I cannot take a bus. I have never taken a bus in my life. I have luggage. I have standards and a job center. And You want me to go to a job center? I have a degree in art history. A degree you have never used," I countered. "A degree I paid for. A degree that hangs in a frame in a house you just got kicked out of." I took a step closer to her. I needed her to hear this. I needed her to understand that the ATM was broken and the bank was closed. "You do not have standards anymore, Zoe," I said. "You have a reality. And the reality is that you are homeless, you are broke, and you are married to a felon. You do not get to have standards until you can pay for them." "But I will starve," she wailed, dropping the brochure. "I have no money for food. I have no money for a taxi. I will die out there." "You will not starve," I said firmly. "I called your Aunt Clara. She is expecting you. She will pick you up at the station in Birmingham. She will give you a bed. She will give you dinner." Zoe let out a sob of relief. "Aunt Clara. Okay, so I can stay with her. She will take care of me." I shook my head. "She will not take care of you, Zoe. She will house you. For 1 month. That is the deal I made with her. You have 30 days. 30 days for what she asked, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her ruined designer coat. 30 days to find a job," I said, pointing to the brochure on the floor. "Pick it up." She didn't move. "Pick it up," I thundered, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She scrambled to pick up the pamphlet. She held it like it was radioactive. "That center helps people find work," I said. "Real work, not planning charity galas, not hosting brunches. Work, waitressing, data entry, cleaning, whatever pays." "Cleaning," she gasped. "I cannot clean. You can, and you will," I said, "if that is what it takes. You are going to learn something you should have learned 20 years ago. You are going to learn how to earn the first $10 of your life." I walked over to the window. The snow was still falling outside, covering the tracks of the police cars. "Do you know how I earned my first $10, Zoe?" I asked. Not turning around. "I swept hair in a barber shop. I was 10 years old. I swept other men's hair off a linoleum floor for 6 hours to make a dime. And when I held that dime, I felt like a king. Because it was mine. No one gave it to me. I traded my sweat for it." I turned back to her. "You have never felt that. You have only felt the weight of my money. You have only felt the ease of swiping a card that I pay off at the end of the month. You think money is magic. You think it appears because you deserve it." "I am sorry," she wept. "I am sorry I was spoiled. I will change. Just give me some cash. Just a little. Just $500 for emergencies. Please, Daddy. I am scared." I looked at her. My heart ached. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to give her the money, to pull out my wallet and give her everything I had, to stop her pain. That is what fathers do. We protect. We provide. But I knew that if I gave her money now, I would be killing her. I would be feeding the sickness that had allowed Declan to take over our lives. I would be enabling the weakness that made her stand silent while I was pushed to the floor. "No," I said. My voice was soft, but it was harder than iron. "No money, Zoe. Not a penny." She looked at me as if I had slapped her again. But why, she cried. "You have millions. You just bought the bank debt. You are rich. Why are you being so cruel? Because I love you, I said. And because you owe me. Owe you? She blinked confused. Yes, I said. I pulled a small notebook from my pocket. It was the ledger I had kept, the forensic accounting of their betrayal. I opened it to the last page. I tapped the figures circled in red ink. $162,000, I read aloud. What is that? She asked. That is the amount of money you and Declan spent on the supplementary credit cards in the last 5 years, I said. Not for bills. Not for the mortgage. For fun. For clothes. For spas. For dinners. For that watch he bought. For the lifestyle you thought you were entitled to. I looked up at her. You stole $162,000 from me, Zoe. You didn't call it stealing because I let you do it. I called it a bonus. I called it help. But it was theft. You took my labor and you threw it away on vanity. I closed the notebook and put it back in my pocket. So here's the deal, I said. You go to Birmingham, you live with Aunt Clara, you get a job, any job, you work, you save, you learn what $1 costs in hours of your life. And when you have paid me back every single cent of that $162,000, then you can come back. She stared at me, her mouth open in horror. 162,000, she whispered. That will take years. I can never pay that back working at a job center. Then it will take years, I said, shrugging. Maybe 10 years, maybe 20. But until that debt is cleared, until you have restored what you took, you are not welcome at my table. You cannot be serious, she said, her voice rising to a shriek. You are my father. You cannot put a price on our relationship. I didn't put a price on it, Zoe, I said. You did. You sold me out for a trip to the Maldives. You sold me out for a Tesla. You put the price tag on my dignity. I am just sending you the invoice. I walked toward the door. I had said everything I needed to say. The rest was up to her. Daddy, she screamed, running to block my path. You are leaving me to die. You are abandoning me. I stopped. I looked down at her. She looked so small, so fragile. I am not leaving you to die, Zoe, I said gently. I am leaving you to live. For the first time in your life, you are going to live. You are going to feel the cold. You are going to feel the hunger. And you are going to feel the pride of feeding yourself. I reached out and touched her cheek. It was wet and cold. Be strong, I whispered. Find the woman your mother wanted you to be. She was a worker, Zoe. She wasn't a princess. She built this life with me. She didn't just inherit it. I pulled my hand away. The taxi will be here in 2 minutes, I said. The driver has been paid to take you to the bus station. Do not miss the bus. It is a long walk to Birmingham. I stepped around her. I opened the door. The cold night air rushed in again, cleansing the house of the stagnant air of entitlement. Goodbye, Zoe. I walked out. I walked down the steps. I got into the back of Sterling's car. Wait, she screamed from the doorway. Wait. I didn't look back. Drive, I said to Sterling. The car pulled away. I stared straight ahead. I did not watch her in the rearview mirror. I knew what I would see. A broken woman standing in the ruins of a fantasy. But in the ashes of that fantasy, maybe, just maybe, a real person could start to grow. I settled back into the seat. My hip ached. My heart ached. But my conscience was clear. I had evicted the parasites. I had reclaimed my name. And I had given my daughter the only gift that mattered anymore. The truth. It was a hard lesson. The hardest one I had ever taught. But as the car turned onto the highway heading back toward the city lights, I knew it was the only way she would ever survive. I closed my eyes. The invoice was sent. Now I just had to wait and see if she had the courage to pay it. The spring air in Atlanta was thick with pollen and the smell of wet concrete. It was the smell of progress. I stood on the edge of the construction site, my boots coated in red Georgia clay, looking up at the steel skeleton rising against the blue sky. This was the Ruby King Community Center. It was going to have a library, a gymnasium, and a vocational training workshop where kids from the neighborhood could learn how to build things instead of just how to survive. I was paying for every rivet, every beam, every hour of labor. It was the best money I had ever spent. It had been 3 months since the blizzard, 3 months since the eviction, 3 months since I took back my name. My phone vibrated in the pocket of my safety vest. It was a cheap, prepaid number. I knew who it was. Sterling had told me that Declan was out on bail. His parents had put up their double-wide trailer in Macon to secure the bond. It wasn't much, but the judge had taken pity on them. I looked at the screen. I let it ring. I watched the crane operator swing a ton of steel into place. Precision, balance, consequences. The phone stopped. Then it started again immediately. I slid my finger across the screen. I didn't say hello. I just listened. The breathing on the other end was ragged, wet, and desperate. It sounded like a man who had been running for a long time and had finally hit a wall. Otis. The voice was a ghost. It wasn't the booming, arrogant baritone of the CEO who had commanded the dining room. It was a thin, high whine. It was the sound of a dog that had been kicked too many times. Otis, please don't hang up. I stood silent, watching the sparks fly from a welder's torch 3 stories up. It is Declan, he whispered, as if I didn't know, as if I hadn't memorized the frequency of his desperation. I know who it is, I said. My voice was calm, steady, like the foundation I was standing on. Why are you calling me Declan? You are violating the restraining order. I have nowhere else to go, he sobbed. The sound was pathetic, tinny, and small. I am at the Motel 6 off the interstate, the one near the airport. It is... Otis, it is filthy. There are bugs. The water is brown. I haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days. I waited. I let the silence stretch out. I let him feel the distance between his motel room and my construction site. Crystal left me, he continued, his voice cracking. She took everything. I came back from the arraignment and the room was empty. She took the last of the cash I hid. She took my laptop. She even took my shoes, Otis. She took my Ferragamo loafers. I am wearing flip-flops. It is raining, and I am wearing flip-flops. I felt a flicker of amusement. Crystal Vance. The mistress paid for with my dividends. She was a better shark than he ever was. She smelled the blood in the water and she ate the rest of the carcass before swimming away. She was a business expense, Declan, I said coldly. And the business went bankrupt. What did you expect? Loyalty. You bought her. When the check stopped clearing, the product was withdrawn. That is basic economics. You should know that. You were a CEO. I am not a CEO, he wailed. I am nothing. The lawyer. The public defender. He says I am looking at 10 years, Otis. 10 years in federal prison. Fraud. Embezzlement. Elder abuse. They are throwing the book at me. He says the DA wants to make an example out of me because because you are a prominent figure. I adjusted my hard hat. The sun was warm on my face. I am not a victim, Declan. I am the plaintiff. There is a difference. Please, Otis, you have to help me. Drop the charges. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I had permission to use the funds. If you sign an affidavit saying it was a loan, just a loan that went bad, they will drop the fraud charges. I will pay you back. I swear. I will work. I will do anything. Work, I asked. Yes, I will work for you. I will come to the site. I will carry bricks. I will sweep floors. Just get me out of this. I cannot go to prison. I am not built for prison, Otis. I am soft. He was right. He was soft. He was soft because I had made him soft. I had cushioned every fall. I had padded every corner. I had turned a grown man into a giant infant wrapped in cashmere, but the time for cushioning was over. You want to work? I asked. Yes. Yes, please. You want to sweep floors. I will do it. I will be the best janitor you ever had. I looked at the young men working on the site. They were sweating. They were grunting. They were earning $15 an hour, and they were proud of it. They were building something real. I don't need a janitor, Declan, I said. I have men here who respect the job, men who show up on time, men who don't steal from the payroll. You are not qualified to sweep my floors, son. You don't have the character for it. Otis, please. He begged, his dignity completely gone, now dissolving into the static of the cheap phone line. We are family. I was your son-in-law. I sat at your table. The table. He brought it back to the table. He brought it back to the scene of the crime. I closed my eyes and I saw the dining room. I saw the snow falling outside the window. I saw the empty chair at the head of the table. The chair he had claimed. The chair he had pushed me out of. Let us talk about that table, Declan, I said, my voice dropping an octave, rumbling deep in my chest. Yes, he breathed hopeful now, thinking he had found an opening, thinking he could manipulate my nostalgia. The Christmas dinners. The good times. We can have that again. Do you remember what you said to me? I asked. You said that seat belonged to the provider. You said it belonged to the man who paid the bills. I was drunk, he stammered. I didn't mean it. It was the stress. You meant every word I said, cutting him off. And you were right. That seat does belong to the provider. I walked away from the noise of the construction toward the quiet of the trailer office. That chair is empty right now, Declan. It is sitting in the dining room of the mansion. The cleaners have scrubbed the gravy out of the rug. The wood has been polished. It is shining in the sunlight. It is waiting. I can sit there, he whispered. I can sit there and listen to you. I will listen this time, Otis. No, I said. You will never sit there again, not because I am angry, not because I am vindictive. I paused. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to understand the physics of his failure. You will never sit there because you don't fit, I said. That chair is designed for a man, Declan. It is designed for a human being who carries his own weight. It is designed for a person who builds, who protects, who gives. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and sawdust. It is not built for a parasite, I said. Silence. Total crushing silence on the other end of the line. A parasite takes, I continued. A parasite feeds on the host until the host is dry. You lived in my house, you drove my car, you spent my money, and when you thought I was empty, you tried to discard me. But you forgot one thing, son. What he whispered. You cannot kill the host if the host is the one holding the pesticide, I said. Otis, please. I am hanging up now, Declan, I said. The battery on your phone is dying. Save it for your lawyer. You are going to need him. No, wait. And Declan, I added one last thing. What? When you go to prison, try to find a job in the library. It is quiet there, and maybe you can finally read a book on how to be a man, because you certainly didn't learn it from me. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear him screaming. A tiny, distant sound like a mosquito trapped in a jar. Otis. Otis. I pressed the red button. The screaming stopped. I looked at the phone. I blocked the number. I put the phone back in my pocket. I looked at the construction site. The steel beams were strong. The foundation was solid. This building would stand for 100 years. It would shelter thousands of people. It would be a legacy. Declan was a footnote, a cautionary tale, a smudge on the blueprint that I had just erased. I walked back toward the foreman. Hey, Mr. King, the foreman yelled, waving a roll of drawings. We are ready to pour the concrete for the entrance ramp. Do you want to toss in a lucky coin? I smiled. It was a genuine smile, a smile that reached my eyes. No need, Sam, I said. I already paid the price for this entrance. I walked onto the site, my boots heavy and sure on the ground. I was Otis King. I was 75 years old, and I was just getting started. The chair was empty, and for the first time in a long time, the house was clean. The for sale sign in the front yard of the Lincoln Park mansion did not stay up for long. In a market hungry for status symbols, a house like that is red meat. It sold in 3 days. $3.2 million, cash. The buyers were a young couple from Silicon Valley. They saw the marble floors and the high ceilings, and they saw a dream. I saw a crime scene. I saw the spot where I fell. I saw the door that was slammed in my face. I saw the ghost of a family that never really existed. I signed the closing papers on a Tuesday morning in Sterling's office. The pen scratched against the paper, a dry, final sound. It was the same sound as a shovel hitting dirt. I was burying the past. When I handed the pen back to the notary, I felt a physical shift in my center of gravity. The weight was gone. The mortgage, the maintenance, the taxes, the memories. Gone. Sterling slid the check across the mahogany desk. It was a cashier's check, heavy paper, lots of zeros. What are you going to do with it, Otis? Sterling asked. Buy a condo in Florida. Get a boat. I looked at the check. $3 million. It was a lot of money to most people. To me, it was just bricks and mortar converted into liquidity. I am not going to Florida, Sterling, I said, folding the check and putting it in my breast pocket. I am done with leisure. Leisure makes you soft. Leisure is what created Declan. I am going to build something, I said. Build what? A legacy. I drove my new car straight from the law office to the south side of Atlanta. I had bought a vintage Porsche 911, silver, fast, mechanical. It was a driver's car. It required attention. It required respect. It was nothing like the Tesla that drove itself while the driver fell asleep at the wheel. I pulled up to a vacant lot on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. It was an eyesore. Overgrown weeds, broken glass, a chain-link fence that was falling down. But I didn't see the blight. I saw the lines. I saw the elevation. I saw the potential. I bought the lot that afternoon. Construction started 2 weeks later. I didn't hire a general contractor. I was the general contractor. I was on site every morning at 6 a.m., wearing my hard hat and my boots, holding a roll of blueprints that I had drawn by hand. The young workers looked at me with skepticism at first. They saw an old man with white hair and a limp. They thought I was just the money. They thought I would sit in the air-conditioned trailer and drink coffee. They learned quickly. I taught them how to pour concrete so it wouldn't crack in the Georgia heat. I taught them how to weld a joint so it would hold up a hurricane. I taught them that a millimeter off on the foundation meant an inch off on the roof. I worked them hard. But I paid them double the union rate, and I bought them lunch every day. We built it in 6 months. It rose from the red clay like a phoenix of glass and steel. It wasn't a dark, heavy fortress like the mansion. It was light. It was open. It breathed. We called it the Ruby King Center. The sign was made of brushed aluminum backlit with soft LEDs. I stood there on opening day watching the sun hit the letters. Ruby. My wife. The woman who had worked double shifts so I could go to architecture school. The woman who never asked for a mansion but deserved a palace. The center wasn't a monument to my ego. It was a factory for the future. There was a library with computers that actually worked. There was a gymnasium with a floor so polished you could see your face in it. There was a workshop full of tools, saws, drills, 3D printers where kids who had never held anything heavier than a phone could learn the weight of creation. The opening ceremony was crowded. The mayor was there. The city council was there. They gave speeches. They talked about community and investment and the future. I stood in the back. I didn't want to make a speech. I just wanted to watch the doors open. I saw a kid, maybe 12 years old, walk into the workshop. He looked scared. He looked like he didn't belong. He picked up a hammer. He held it awkwardly. I walked over to him. "Choke up on the handle, son," I said gently. "Let the weight do the work." He looked at me. "Who are you?" "I am Otis," I said. "I work here." I spent my days at the center. I wasn't just the donor. I was the mentor. I taught drafting classes. I taught financial literacy. I taught young men that money isn't magic, it is math. I taught them that respect is earned, not demanded. And for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't lonely. I was surrounded by noise. The sound of basketballs bouncing, the sound of saws buzzing, the sound of laughter. It was the music of life. But I didn't just work. I lived. I remembered the points. The 4 million American Express points I had saved from Declan is grasp. I booked the trip. Tokyo. I flew first class. I sat in the suite that Declan had thought was his birthright. I drank the champagne. I ate the caviar. But I didn't take selfies. I didn't post it on Instagram. I just looked out the window at the clouds and appreciated the engineering of the wing. Tokyo was a revelation. I walked the streets of Ginza, looking up at the buildings. I stood in front of the Tokyo International Forum, admiring the steel truss structure. I ate sushi at a counter with 6 seats where the chef treated the fish like a sacred object. I wasn't an old man in Tokyo. I was a student. I was learning again. I was seeing the world with fresh eyes. I traveled to Kyoto. I sat in a Zen garden for 3 hours watching the way the rocks interrupted the flow of the sand. It was peaceful. It was balanced. It was everything my life with Zoe and Declan had not been. I met people, real people, not social climbers, not parasites. I met an architect from Germany in a jazz bar in Shinjuku. We drank Suntory whiskey and argued about Bauhaus versus brutalism until 3 in the morning. He didn't care about my net worth. He cared about my ideas. I met a widow from California on the bullet train. She was painting watercolors of Mount Fuji. We had dinner. We talked about loss. We talked about rebuilding. We didn't talk about money. We talked about the light. When I came back to Atlanta, I didn't go back to a lonely life. I joined the Atlanta Architects Club. It was a group of old Lions men who had built the skyline in the 70s and 80s. We met once a month at a steakhouse downtown. When I walked in for the first time, I was nervous. I had been out of the game for a while. I had been hiding in my mansion, playing the role of the retired grandfather. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I heard a voice boom out, "Otis King, is that you?" It was Sam Henderson, the banker. He was sitting at a round table with 4 other men. "Get over here," Sam yelled. "We need a 4th for bridge and we need someone who knows how to drink scotch." I sat down. They poured me a drink. They asked me about the Ruby King Center. They asked me about Tokyo. They didn't ask me about my daughter. They knew. They respected the silence. I looked around the table. These were men of substance, men with calluses on their hands and steel in their spines. They laughed loud. They argued hard. They respected strength. I realized then that I had been starving for this. I had been starving for the company of my peers. I had been trying to buy the love of children who didn't respect me when I should have been enjoying the respect of men who knew my worth. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. My health improved. My hip stopped hurting. The doctor said it was because I was walking more. I think it was because I wasn't carrying the weight of a dead marriage on my back anymore. I started dressing better. Not to impress anyone, but because I liked the feel of good fabric. I wore my bespoke suits to the center. I wanted the kids to see what a black man in a suit looked like when he wasn't a defendant or a preacher. I wanted them to see a boss. One afternoon, I was sitting in my office at the Ruby King Center. The glass walls looked out over the workshop. I could see the sparks flying from the welders. I could see the future being built. Sterling walked in. He looked happy. He had a folder in his hand. "Quarterly report, Mr. King," he said, placing it on my desk. I didn't open it. "How are we doing, Sterling?" "We are up," he said. "The investments are performing. The center is under budget. And Tech Nova." I smiled. "Tech Nova. The new CEO is turning it around," Sterling said. "She cut the overhead. She fired the dead weight. She is actually focusing on the product. We might break even by Christmas." "Good," I said. "Keep an eye on her. Make sure she doesn't buy any Rolexes." Sterling laughed. "I think we learned that lesson, sir." I turned my chair to look out the window. The sun was setting over the neighborhood. The street lights were flickering on. It was a good life. It was a full life. I was 75 years old. I had lost a house, but I had gained a home. I had lost a family, but I had found a community. I thought about the man I was 6 months ago, the man sitting at the folding table, the man afraid to speak up. He was dead, buried under the snow of that winter night. The man sitting in this chair was Otis King, and he had a lot of work left to do. The sold sign was planted in the front lawn like a flag of liberation. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at the mansion one last time. For decades, this structure had been the symbol of my success, a testament to the empire I had built with my own hands. It was where I raised my children, where I hosted grand parties, and where I thought I would spend my final days surrounded by a loving family. But in recent years, those walls had absorbed too many lies. The hallways echoed with the whispers of betrayal, and the grand dining room felt cold with the memory of calculations made by those who were waiting for me to die. It was no longer a home. It was a beautiful, expensive mausoleum of a life that no longer existed. When I signed the final papers at the title company, the young clerk looked at me with a mixture of awe and concern. She saw an old man selling his estate and perhaps imagined I was downsizing out of necessity or moving into a facility where I would fade away. She could not have been more wrong. As I handed over the keys to the new owners, a young couple full of dreams and naivety, I did not feel a sense of loss. I felt lighter. The millions that hit my bank account that afternoon were not a retirement fund to be hoarded for ungrateful heirs. They were ammunition for my second act. I drove away from that neighborhood without looking back. My destination was not a small apartment to wait for the end, but a plot of land on the other side of the city in a neighborhood that had been forgotten by the developers and the elite. This was where my wife Ruby had grown up. It was where we had met when we had nothing but ambition and love. For years, Ruby had talked about building a place where the community could gather a safe haven for art, for learning, and for connection. She died before we could make that dream a reality, and in my grief I had focused on making money rather than making meaning. That changed today. I pulled out my old drafting table from storage. I dusted off my rulers and my pencils. My hands, which had trembled with rage just weeks ago when I discovered my children's treachery, were now steady. I was an architect before I was a businessman, and I was about to design my masterpiece. The Ruby King Center would not be a vanity project with my name on it. It would be a living, breathing space for the people. The construction began 2 months later. I was there every single morning at 7 o'clock wearing my boots and a hard hat. The foreman, a man named Mike, initially treated me with the delicate deference one gives to a fragile investor. He expected me to write checks and stay out of the way. He was surprised when I corrected a structural flaw in the blueprints during our first meeting. He was even more surprised when he saw me climbing the scaffolding to inspect the steel beams. I felt the blood returning to my veins. The smell of sawdust and wet concrete was better than any medicine the doctors could prescribe. I was not 75 years old on that construction site. I was a creator again. When the Ruby King Center finally opened its doors, it was the proudest day of my life. There were no politicians giving long speeches or socialites drinking champagne. Instead, there were families from the neighborhood, teenagers looking for a place to study, and elderly people looking for companionship. I watched a group of children running through the atrium I had designed to catch the morning light, and I felt a warmth in my chest that no luxury vacation could ever provide. I had taken the money that my children had tried to steal, the money they had plotted and schemed for, and I had turned it into something that would outlive us all. This was my legacy. It was not a bank account frozen in a trust. It was laughter, it was safety, and it was community. With the center running smoothly under a board of directors I trusted explicitly, I realized I still had time. I still had energy. For the first time in my life, I had no obligations to anyone but myself. I packed a single suitcase. I did not take the private jets or the first-class cabins I used to frequent for business. I wanted to see the world from the ground level. I traveled to Italy not to stay in five-star hotels, but to walk the streets of Florence and sketch the cathedrals. I sat in small cafes in Paris, drinking espresso and watching the world go by, realizing how much I had missed while I was busy building an empire for people who did not appreciate it. In Barcelona, I met a group of retired architects who met weekly to discuss urban design. They welcomed me not as a wealthy American, but as a peer. We spent hours arguing about the works of Gaudi and the future of sustainable housing. I felt a camaraderie I had not felt in decades. These were my people. We laughed, we drank wine, and we shared stories of our careers. I realized that friendship, true friendship, is based on shared passion and mutual respect, not on what one person can do for another. I made friends with a woman named Elena, a retired professor who showed me the hidden corners of the city. We walked for miles talking about history and art. There was no agenda. There was no expectation of inheritance. It was just two people enjoying the sunset of their lives with dignity and joy. I joined a local architecture club when I returned to the States. I started mentoring young students who had brilliant ideas but no resources. I helped them refine their designs, and I funded scholarships for the most promising among them. Seeing their eyes light up when they solved a design problem gave me a sense of continuity. I was passing down my knowledge, my passion, and my values to a generation that was hungry for it. This was the family I had chosen. They did not share my blood, but they shared my spirit. One afternoon I sat in the garden of the Ruby King Center. The roses were in full bloom, the same variety Ruby had carried in her bouquet on our wedding day. I watched an elderly couple holding hands on a bench, and I realized I was not lonely. I had feared that cutting ties with my children would leave me isolated, a bitter old man in an empty house. Instead, it had opened the door to a world I had neglected. I was surrounded by life. My phone rang. It was a number I recognized, one of my sons. I let it ring. I did not feel anger. I did not feel the urge to answer and scold him or explain myself. I simply felt indifference. That part of my life was a closed chapter, a book I had put back on the shelf. I had said everything I needed to say in the courtroom and through my actions. They were living with the consequences of their choices, and I was living with the rewards of mine. I stood up and walked toward the art studio where a class was beginning. The instructor waved at me and the students smiled. I was not the rich target to be exploited. I was Otis. I was the man who built this place. I was a friend. I was a mentor. At 75 years old, I had discovered the secret that had eluded me for so long. Rebirth is not something that happens to you. It is something you build brick by brick, decision by decision. It requires the courage to burn down the structures that no longer serve you, even if they are filled with memories, and the faith to build something new on the ashes. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. I adjusted my scarf and walked into the studio. I had a long life ahead of me, and I intended to live every single minute of it with the vibrancy and authenticity that I had finally reclaimed. My name is Otis King, and my life is just beginning. The view from the 42nd floor is different from any other perspective I have known. It is not the view from the porch of the old mansion where I spent years waiting for visits that never came. It is not the view from the dusty construction sites where I spent my youth building empires for other men. It is a view of absolute clarity. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass of my new penthouse, I can see the city of Chicago spread out like a map of my own history. I can point to the skyline and see the steel beams I approved, the facades I designed, and the streets where I once walked with holes in my shoes. But for the first time in decades, I am not looking at what I built for others. I am looking at what I saved for myself. I adjust my position in the leather armchair. It is a modern piece, Italian design, sleek and comfortable. It does not creak like the antique furniture my children fought over before I was even in the grave. It smells of newness and possibility. The silence in this apartment is not the heavy, suffocating silence of abandonment that filled my old house. It is a peaceful silence. It is the quiet of a sanctuary. There are no whispers in the hallway. There are no phantom calculations of my life expectancy being done in the kitchen. There is just me, Otis King, and the hum of the city below. For a long time I believed that my value was measured in the figures on a bank statement. I thought that if I could just accumulate enough, give enough, and build enough, I would secure a place of honor at the head of the table. I thought my money was a shield that would protect me from the indignities of old age. I was wrong. My money was not a shield. It was the bait. It was the very thing that turned my own flesh and blood into predators. They looked at me and saw a vault to be cracked, not a father to be cherished. They saw a resource to be mined until it was empty. I close my eyes and take a sip of the scotch I have poured for myself. It tastes smooth without the bitterness of regret. I think about the moment I signed the papers that cut them off. The lawyers were nervous. They asked me if I was sure. They asked me if I wanted to leave a small stipend, a safety net for the children who had plotted against me. I remember the trembling in my hand, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the decision. To say no to your own children goes against every biological instinct a parent has. We are wired to give. We are wired to sacrifice. We are wired to set ourselves on fire to keep them warm. But I realized something in that lawyer's office. A parent's job is not to be a perpetual resource. A parent's job is to teach. And the final, most painful lesson I had to teach them was the lesson of consequence. By cutting them off, I was not destroying them. I was forcing them to become what I had failed to make them earlier. Adults. Men and women who must stand on their own 2 feet. The greatest asset I possess is not the millions in the trust fund I established for the community center. It is not this penthouse. It is not the prestige of my career. The greatest asset I have is the ability I found late in life to say no. No to manipulation. No to emotional blackmail. No to the idea that I owe anyone my dignity just because we share a last name. That word, 2 simple letters, was the key to my prison cell. When I finally said it, when I finally drew the line in the sand and refused to be crossed, I felt a surge of power that I hadn't felt since I was a young man breaking ground on my first project. I pick up the phone from the side table. It is quiet. For years I dreaded this quiet. I used to call them inventing reasons just to hear their voices, ignoring the annoyance in their tone, ignoring the rush to get off the line unless they needed a check. Now the phone is quiet because I want it to be. I have blocked the numbers that only ring when there is a crisis I am expected to pay for. I have filtered out the noise. The people who call me now are the people who want to talk to Otis. They call to discuss architecture. They call to plan a trip to the coast. They call because they enjoy my company, not my credit limit. I look at my reflection in the darkened window. The man staring back at me is 75 years old. His hair is white. His face is lined with the geography of a long, hard life, but his back is straight. His eyes are clear. For a long time, I lost him. I became just the old man. I became the grandfather who wrote checks. I became the obstacle standing between my children and their inheritance. I let them take my name and turn it into a function. But tonight, I know exactly who I am. I am not a victim of elder abuse. I am not a sad story to be whispered about at church. I am the man who realized the plot before the final act. I am the man who rewrote the ending of his own play. I am Otis King, and I have reclaimed my kingdom. It is a kingdom of one, perhaps, but it is a kingdom of peace. I think about the other men and women I have met at the community center, people my age who are still trapped. They are afraid. They are afraid that if they stop giving, no one will visit. They are afraid that if they speak up, they will be abandoned. They tolerate the disrespect because they fear the loneliness. I want to tell them what I have found here in the skyline. I want to tell them that the loneliness of dignity is far better than the crowded room of humiliation. I want to tell them that you cannot buy love, but you can pay a very high price for a counterfeit version of it. The sun has set completely now, and the city is a grid of gold and amber lights. I feel a sense of completion. I have settled my accounts. I have balanced the ledger of my life. I have no debts to anyone, and no one has a claim on me. The anger that fueled me during the trial and the sale of the house has evaporated. It has been replaced by a profound sense of relief. I survived. I survived the betrayal. I survived the heartbreak. And I am still standing. I stand up and walk to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. I look down at the streets where people are rushing home, rushing to dinners, rushing to lives that are complicated and messy. I wish them well. I even wish my children well from a distance. I hope they find their way. I hope they learn to build their own castles instead of trying to tear down mine. But whether they do or not is no longer my burden to carry. I turn back to the room. My new life is waiting. I have a flight to catch in the morning. I have a meeting with the scholarship board next week. I have a life to live. I am not waiting to die. I am just getting started. We spend our lives building castles for our children, hoping they will be our shelter when we are old. We lay the bricks with a sweat and sacrifice, imagining a future where we are safe within the walls we created for them. But sometimes the very foundations we lay become the stones they use to crush us. We realize too late that we built a fortress for them, but a prison for ourselves. I learned that true dignity isn't given, it's commanded. It is not something you receive as a gift for good behavior or generous parenting. It is something you must seize. You cannot buy respect with generosity. You cannot trade your self-worth for their affection. If you have to pay for a seat at the table, you are not a guest. You are the catering. And you certainly cannot keep a seat at the table if you're afraid to flip it over. You must be willing to walk away from the table entirely to prove that you do not need their crumbs. A legacy isn't about what you leave behind in a bank account. It is not about the houses or the cars or the trust funds. Those things are dust. They are easily squandered and quickly forgotten. A true legacy is the spine you show when the world tries to break you. It is the example you set of self-respect. It is the courage to say that you matter not because of what you provide, but because of who you are. Never hand over the keys to your life until you're ready to leave the driver's seat. Keep your hands on the wheel. Chart your own course. Drive until the very last drop of gas is gone. Because this life is yours. It always was. And no one, not even the children you love more than breath itself, has the right to take it from you before you are done living it. My name is Otis King, and I am finally truly free. Otis's journey reminds us that our twilight years are not meant to be a waiting room for the end, nor a vault for ungrateful heirs. We often fear loneliness so much that we trade our dignity for their company, but true isolation is being surrounded by those who only value your utility. Reclaiming your life is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of survival. Your true worth is never found in the inheritance you leave behind, but in the peace you cultivate when you finally stop trying to buy the love of those who will never be satisfied. If Otis's story inspired you to stand up for your own dignity, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one.